Welcome to the IT Modernization Summit presented by StateScoop and EdScoop. I'm Jake Williams, the Vice President of Content and Community for StateScoop and EdScoop, and I'm so excited to have you here with us today. For the last 9 years, the StateScoop and EdScoop teams have been working closely with technology leaders from across the country in states, cities, counties, and higher education institutions. We bring the top leaders from government and higher education together with the brightest minds in the private sector to exchange ideas, best practices, and find new ways to work together to serve residents and students better. Today's IT Modernization Summit puts a lens on the massive digital transformation efforts underway in the public sector. Spurred by the COVID-19 pandemic, these leaders and their departments are modernizing and transforming at a rapid pace, and they're doing it through the lens of improving experience, finding efficiencies, and elevating the way they do business. Today, we have some of the most prestigious leaders across the community here, from C-level leaders and cabinet leaders in some of the largest states and cities across the country, to technology thought leaders from higher education, to the incredible private sector decision makers who partner with them to make it all happen. During today's summit, we'll discuss how leaders are leveraging relief funding, approaching cloud, rethinking smart cities, and organizing for optimal success, and so much more. The goal for today's sessions is that you learn something new, find a new opportunity to collaborate, and leave inspired to do something big. Please, today, tweet along with us using the hashtag ITModSummit. And of course, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Ernst & Young LLP, Okta, Salesforce, and Splunk. With that, let's kick off our program. I'm so excited to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day, Clay Garner, Chief Innovation Officer for the City of San Jose, California.
Welcome everyone to the IT Modernization Summit. My name is Clay Garner, and I serve as Chief Innovation Officer of the City of San Jose and Director of the Mayor's Office of Tech and Innovation. It's my honor to speak with you all today from the urban heart of Silicon Valley amidst challenging times. Digital services, modernizing technology, embracing change, these are hefty topics for this summit, but right now, I'm going to focus on the evolving expectations and mission piece because I think that underpins everything we do. And I'm not a traditional IT guy, as you can probably tell by my role, but IT is certainly no longer a traditional discipline. From bridging the digital divide in our low-income communities to protecting our cities from ever-multiplying cybersecurity threats, to enabling a virtual workforce amidst this public health crisis, the expectations on public sector tech and innovation professionals are totally different now. We are no longer a back office function, but at the policymaking table with electeds. We are out in the community building products and digital services to address problems like homelessness, internet access, emergency response, and traffic safety management, and of course, still printers as well. And San Jose really is among the most thinly staffed big city halls in this country. Out of pure necessity, we have got to do more with less. And as GovTech leaders, our departments, electeds, and communities, they look to us to develop the tech solutions that will scale and augment the capacity of our workforce, that help our residents get what they need from us, and that build resilience in our operational infrastructure for the long term. And this pandemic, I don't have to tell you this, but it has totally underscored why government technology and innovation matter. In 2020, internet access became a front and center issue in San Jose. How were our residents going to study, work, get critical information about free meals and health without a reliable way to connect? For one, we needed to break down interdepartmental silos. So our IT staff, in collaboration with our library and schools, developed a Digital Equity Priority Index to target these investments in free hotspots, Wi-Fi, and other interventions in our most struggling census tracts. We saw IT and issues of socioeconomic and racial equity intersecting in a big way. And that's not just an operational change, but a total shift in the mindset of how we invest and measure outcomes. In 2020, we adopted San Jose's first citywide digital privacy policy, which is the first baby step in nurturing an organization that really understands and is starting to care about how technology and privacy intersect. Within our IT department, we also launched a data equity program where we're looking at how to build the organizational mindset, infrastructure, and skills to improve our service delivery through leveraging data on outcomes and equity in San Jose, a big challenge. And we're combining service delivery and data on issues that run across departments. This, again, requires a different approach in how we're collaborating in government. Data equity, digital privacy, some of the most important and impassioned policy discussions in our country revolve around these topics. And IT is leading the way forward here. Again, this is a huge change. This is not the same old IT. So how will we meet the challenges that come with it? As IT advances further into this forward deployed posture, again, the expectations and opportunities are shifting. We have to be able to measure the short-term and long-term outcomes of our community investments. And San Jose has developed a rigorous framework to regularly update the council and community of this progress and the challenges we're facing with our IT projects. Now, we are hiring positions like product managers, designers, data equity leads, and digital privacy officers. We are collaborating with outside organizations to co-create products like Coding It Forward, local universities, and the United States Digital Response. We've built youth mental health apps, and tools to support police transparency. Again, these are new and important areas for our community, for IT as well. I'm guessing that, these are not positions or partnerships that you would have seen in an IT department 20 years ago, or maybe even 10 years ago. And with these new positions, more early career talents, new skill sets that managers might not be familiar with, we need to foster an environment that is iterative based on these changes. We need to understand how to motivate engineers that don't care about a stable civil service role. How do we communicate our community service mission to talents? We need to create flexibility so that our critical individual contributors are not forced into management roles in order to grow their careers. If we don't know how to leverage these emerging resources at first, that's okay. But we have to be open to new ideas and the possibility that initiatives won't be successful. That is how IT is going to keep pace with widening demands. So to close, I want to leave you with a question. As IT becomes a more integral function in resident-facing policy and service delivery, how can we institutionalize flexibility in a way which allows us to meet these changing expectations? Thank you, and I hope this summit serves as a spark for learning and ideating.
Coming up next.
Gio George, Industry Strategy Executive for State and Local Government with Salesforce, is with us now. Gio, good to see you. Thanks for being with us today.
Hey, it's great to see you, Jake. And, thank you for letting me be here today. And it's great to see everyone here too.
Of course. So Gio, you're a former city tech leader, and you've spent many years now with Salesforce. I mean, when you're looking out across the SLED market, the state, local, and education market, what are some of the things that you're seeing when it comes to IT modernization?
Oh, thank you, Jake. I mean, so it's awesome that we have an opportunity to meet with a lot of our state, city, and county leaders across the country. And in those meetings, there are 4 key themes that we've seen as that I see critical for an agency to go through modernization. First key theme is automation of back office processes. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of legacy applications, a lot of outdated manual processes. And and a lot of processes that are on spreadsheets, so part of the things I look back to, like during the pandemic, it exposed a lot of these manual processes and it forced agencies and governments to go digital. And so, I still believe there's still that continued opportunity to really digitize and automate these manual processes and paper-based processes. The second key theme is improving that internal and external collaboration. When you look at the services that a city, state, and county provide, I mean, there's so much coordination and collaboration across departments and agencies. And I think the key thing here is having a communication platform that can really, everyone can operate on a common platform. So that's a key component too. Third key area is providing that transparency and better communication with constituents. End of the day, like when you're a resident or a business, you want to know what are the updates, what are the notifications that I need to keep current, whether it's a permit, whether it's an application, and you want to be able to communicate back to your government and government agency. So that having that platform is so critical to do that. The fourth key theme is, I always call it everything's about data, and government has tremendous amount of data that it generates. And I think one of the key areas here is having the right tools to visualize that and being able to analyze that. One of the things I look at is when you look at these four themes, there are point solutions for each of these themes to address. But I think, end of the day, those point solutions will really help solve the problem for today, but it doesn't really think about the adaptation for the future need. And so one of the things I think about is always, when you look at a platform and developing that overall enterprise-wide strategy, really end of the day, it's an opportunity to connect your existing systems, providing those responsive and online experiences for employees and partners, and really end of the day, having a platform that you can deploy solutions at scale. So I think those are some of the key things when you look at these four themes.
Yeah, so let's dive in. Let's dive into those four. I mean, you started with automation. I think that's a great place to go there. This is something we're hearing so much, so much about from so many different folks across government. So, I mean, how are you specifically seeing automation fit into, again, this greater IT modernization conversation?
Yeah, automation is so critical. And when I think of automation, I think of case management. And when you think of case management is the currency of government, right? I mean, everything is a case, whether it's a license, whether it's a permit, whether you're applying for social services, whether you're actually, calling in your 311 call center for a report on a tree damage, whatever it is, there's always a case involved, and there's so many processes that are tied to it. One of the examples I always think about is the state of Arizona and Arizona Registrar of Contractors. They digitized their whole licensing management process. They implemented and automated a whole digital case management system that essentially guides customers through various stages to obtain the license, to initiate the investigation, or update their credentials. And end of the day, it cut down about 59% of reduction in application deficiencies. So you can kind of see when you automate these processes, there's already benefits there. And then they also reduced the phone call-ins and email inquiries into the department by 18%. So those are some powerful trends and powerful analytics behind that. So that makes it pretty powerful in a lot of ways when you automate.
And you talked about also in your four key areas, you mentioned reporting and analytics toward the end there. I mean, that's a hugely important point. I mean, data management and the power that managing that data can give to state and local agencies, to higher education. I mean, it's quite literally changing the game for these agencies. So, when you're talking to public sector leaders about their modernization strategies, I mean, what role does that reporting and analytics play in that conversation?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Jake. And I think one thing about data is, I always think about some of our, transportation agencies we work with, and they create tremendous amount of data, whether it's a state DOT that works with roads and bridges, or whether it's a transit agency that works with travelers or passengers. What's interesting about this data is that you have the ability to analyze a lot of that and proactively plan accordingly. And so I'll give you a great example. There's a state transportation agency we're working with, and they use Tableau to really identify potential traffic choke points and also high crash zones. along all the different roadways in their jurisdiction. And then what they do is they proactively plan some of the projects that are being considered, and really, end of the day, optimize that project planning to address the right issues at the right time. So that really shows like the ability of using the visualization and seeing able to plan these projects. And when you think about it, especially from transportation, there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of funding that's coming through for modernizing the roads and bridges. And I think that's where data is going to be a key factor.
Yeah, and anything you can do to cut down on the commute time for the average person, always a good government win there. That's awesome.
For sure.
Let's talk about collaboration. So people who have been listening to me moderate events like these, I mean, collaboration is my favorite thing to talk about when it comes to government, right? Whether it's interagency or between cities and states or counties and cities or any combination of the two there. I mean, how are you advising leaders to leverage technology to approach that internal and external collaboration?
That's a great question. One of the things I think about from a collaboration perspective, it's always a great example. It's an incident. When an incident takes place, there's so many different agencies, so many different departments, so many different cross governmental agencies, whether it's federal, state, local governments working together to resolve a particular incident. And having the right tools makes such a big difference. And one of the things I look at is, here at Salesforce, we've acquired Slack last year, and we were thrown into the deep end as a company to adopt and use it. And what I find pretty powerful is the New York MTA. They've been using Slack since 2017, and they use Slack to also manage incidents. So what's fascinating about that is they have incident communication specialists that really, end of the day, that track and summarize a lot of these real-time developments from dispatchers. And going through Slack, they're able to provide real-time feedback loops and updates and really manage that situation or incidents more efficiently and effectively. So that makes it pretty powerful. But then also what's also interesting is that the employees that are on that Slack chain or Slack thread, they're able to share information easily and crowdsource expert answers pretty quickly. So that again goes back to that platform and being able to use that information effectively and easily. So that to me is pretty powerful in a lot of ways.
Yeah, that's a Slack channel I'd love to see, the MTA Slack channel. That's great. So all of this together, right? We're talking about all of these key areas of modernization for folks across the SLED space. And one of the other ones you mentioned was transparency. And so how does all of this come together to sort of improve that transparency with constituents?
That's a great question. So part of my, one of the things I think about, Jake, is, you and we're both constituents. There are also folks that have businesses. So our engagement with government is always, we'll always be engaging with government in some certain fashion. One of the things I always think about is, you probably have a driver's license or a vehicle registration, and we always work with the DMV. So part of it is, how do you engage with the DMV a lot easier? And what's fascinating is we work with the Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles. And what they've done is typically in the past, to notify whether your license is up for renewal or your registration is up for renewal, you get a physical mail letter telling you that. What they've done now is they've implemented a customer engagement platform using Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Really gives the tools that they need to communicate to their constituents on any outreach and channels that they need. And really, end of the day, like notifying your constituents on like, hey, you have your vehicle registration that's expiring. You may want to renew it, and go online and start that process. So really, end of the day, you've simplified a lot of that process, not physically going into the DMV, and also being able to do it a lot more digital processing. So that to me is pretty powerful. And end of the day, like that's sort of that communication that you want, and the timely communications you want from your government.
Gio, we could talk about this stuff so much more. It's always a treat to talk to you, but thanks for being with us today.
Absolutely, Jake. I appreciate it. And thank you for hosting us here today too.
Of course. And there's more to come from today's IT Modernization Summit. Stay with us.
Coming up next.
Welcome back to Statescoop and EdScoop's IT Modernization Summit. I'm Benjamin Freed, the managing editor of Statescoop. Since early 2020, the federal government has pumped hundreds of billions of dollars towards state and local government. First came the CARES Act to help states respond to the COVID-19 outbreak. Then last year, we had the American Rescue Plan, which included $350 billion for state and local governments to invest as the recovery from the pandemic began. And we also had the $1.2 trillion infrastructure law, which includes all kinds of new programs for broadband, electric vehicles, and maybe a little cybersecurity grant program you've seen us cover on Statescoop. Joining me to talk about all of this federal funding and how it folds into state IT is Dennis Goulet, CIO and Commissioner of the Department of Information Technology for the state of New Hampshire. Dennis, thanks for joining me. I want to start right away and just dive right into the cyber grant program. It's late August and the federal fiscal year is about to run out. And we are still waiting to see what the guidance on the grant program is going to look like. As this wait has gone on, what's the latest you're hearing? And has your thinking on the program shifted at all?
Well, what we've heard most recently was kind of encouraging, actually, from our folks at NASCIO telling us that they're seeing some activity, and we think that actually, and instead of what felt like maybe further push off, we might actually be getting close to the goal line on this, and I certainly hope we are. I know that we've been trying to prepare the policymakers to line up the things that we might need to be able to access these funds. So not having certainty about the when and some of the other key details has made it fairly hard for us state CIOs to lock and load. And actually, it's funny because it in some ways it reflects on us, because we're, people think there's money out there and we aren't accessing it when there really isn't yet accessible money. So
yeah. So Doug Robinson, the head of NASCIO, said a few weeks ago that he thinks because the wait has gone on this long, there will probably need to be some kind of extension in the first year of the program. Now, granted, there isn't a ton of money overall, but wouldn't extend, how would you use an extension on the fund on the first year to help the local governments who are going to get most of this money prepare?
Well, first of all, I'll say that, from my perspective, other than what it takes for us to administer the program, I'd be perfectly fine if the local governments got all of the money. I think they need it more than the state does. And so from my perspective, that'll probably be how we look to approach it. I think the things that we need to do next is I think states need to make policy decisions on whether so are there going to be ongoing appropriations, in which case we might invest in some things that are longer term that would continue after the grant runs out. That was certainly the legislative intent. The legislative intent was to get states used to investing in local cybersecurity, important cybersecurity policy and protections. But we know that in some cases that there may not be ongoing appropriations. And New Hampshire may be one of those, in which case we may look to invest those funds on things that are helpful in terms of raising the overall profile, but don't necessarily lock the local governments into long-term expenses that they may not have, that the state hasn't committed to and they may not want.
Yeah. So there will certainly be a lot more to talk about on the cyber grants. Let's move back more broadly back to the American Rescue Plan. You were the president of NASCIO while that law was being made. You talked to Congress several times over the course of that process. How's the delivery of that gone? So in your view?
Well, from my perspective in New Hampshire, we had an entity that was created by the governor's office during COVID to administer and adjudicate CARES Act funding. And so they just rolled right into ARPA. And so it was a really smooth transaction and transition for us. And they kept getting better at it too, right? So I think we have a real experienced crew that's running our the grant program here in New Hampshire, and they have a process that we can use to access. And we were really fortunate at IT in New Hampshire, because I had been working for some months to try to access CARES Act money for some critical IT infrastructure stuff. We didn't succeed in getting CARES money for it, but the program was well vetted, socialized, and shovel ready when ARPA came along. So we were ready to right away start accessing ARPA funds in the very first state of New Hampshire distribution. My department was part of that, part of the receipt of those funds. So it was really exciting. And since then, we've been steadily and relentlessly working with the entities inside New Hampshire to access those funds. And in our case, it's kind of a complicated effort. It's 5 steps, five fairly complex steps to get that money, so it's actually sitting in an appropriation in my budget. So and we just keep cranking on those steps and pushing them through, and hopefully accessing the money for the good of New Hampshire.
So what sort of projects have the ARPA funds allowed you to pursue?
Well, the initial round of funding was really kind of non-exciting stuff for most people, but it was really exciting for us. It was core infrastructure stuff, networking, backup and storage technology, cybersecurity stuff, and it was really interesting because nobody argued that boring infrastructure stuff wasn't really important as we were coming out of COVID, because they, so many times people experienced, oh, this network wasn't good or that network wasn't good. So the fact that we're saying, hey, we're gonna modernize all the networks, we're gonna improve cybersecurity, we're going to reduce the chance that ransomware will affect us, all of that stuff resonated really, really well, and made it kind of easy to access those funds. And we've been operationalizing those ever since. And one of the things about, as you had mentioned it before, in relationship to the grant program, the cyber grant program in the infrastructure bill, but it's same for ARPA, is that money has an end of life, and you really have to operationalize quickly. So that was one of the things we did there. Now we're rolling into application projects that are direct citizen impact projects. And the most recent one we got approved was for a enterprise licensing portal to speed up the process, especially for those professions where we're having workforce problems in New Hampshire. We want to make it easy to become to become licensed as a nurse in New Hampshire, for a very specific example.
Yeah. So you like a professional licensing platform. That sounds like something that a lot of people would be able to take advantage of. You said that there kind of is a time limit on the ARPA funds. Do you have a plan, a roadmap for the lifespan of this act, and where you want to take it next?
Well, it's one of the considerations that we look at as we go further and further into the having the clock tick down. The complexity of the project we might undertake has to reduce if there's still money to be had. So that's one of the things we're looking at. We have a whole bunch of projects under consideration right now, IT related, technology related projects, almost 100. And one of the factors we have to look at is organizational readiness. Is this organization who might accept these funds able to actually operationalize them in time, both in terms of committing the funds as well as finishing the project in time to meet the ARPA deadlines? Now, who knows? I mean, with CARES Act, it got extended twice. But I don't think we can count on that happening. We have to operate as if it won't be extended.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about the CARES Act and maybe its legacy. That was all obviously for emergency procurements, a lot of things that had to get out the door quickly. It's been about 2.5 years since that happened. All the emergency procurements that happened under the CARES Act, what's the fate of those projects now?
Well, it depends on the type of project. Like if it was a kind of something relatively simple where you were buying a thing, then that's fine, no problem, right? Like if I ended up, on using CARES Act money, doing some critical road access upgrades, for example, to deal with the massive exodus of workers from state buildings. That's not a problem, right? Because we purchased equipment, we implemented it, and it has a lifespan. When we go to purchase more equipment, we'll use whatever contracting mechanisms we have in place then. Where it gets a little more complicated is if we did a short-term contract for an application or a system that we used during COVID that we now need to continue using, then there's a challenge there because we didn't actually do a procurement that would have met. The original procurement didn't meet state standards because it was done under the emergency powers of the governor. So now those have to be looked at, and rather, even if you've spent the effort, for example, implementing a complex application with a vendor you're happy with, we may have to go in, and in some cases we are going into a re-procurement just to meet the standards, procurement standards that are in place that weren't in place when during the COVID emergency powers were invoked.
And any examples of that are come to mind?
Well, the one I just came across my desk was kind of fun because our state ski area had implemented a system to deal with ticketing during COVID, and they did it very rapidly, and they did a great job. And now we already have to re-procure it. I'm like, oh my God, we're doing this again already, and I'm sure nobody really wants to because it's hard work doing that stuff. But again, I think that we have to. One of the great things about New Hampshire is we have a very transparent procurement process, very accessible to the public, and we try to stay transparent. And we were way less, obviously, because of the nature of things, we're way less so during COVID in terms of having different approval steps. But now we're going back to that, and I think in some ways we're going retrospective back to that for these procurements that potentially wouldn't have needed to be done if it weren't for the fact that they hadn't been procured in that way in the first place.
Yeah. So I want to wrap up quickly in the next couple of minutes. But with the various waves of federal funding that we've seen over the last few years, just your thoughts on, do you think the relationship between state IT and the federal government has how much it's changed in the last couple of years, and what will be like in the next few years?
Well, it certainly trained us on more on accessing grant money and the hoops you have to jump through to manage it. For example, before we were just looking at getting, every time there was an opportunity, the Homeland Security grant money, trying to access some of that, usually for cybersecurity, because that was the space that we could legitimately access those funds in through the Department of Safety processes. Now we're doing grants management inside IT, which a lot of IT shops were not doing before, and I certainly wasn't doing it in any significant way. And actually, ironically, one of the applications we're looking at is an enhanced grants management system for all the agencies that are accessing ARPA funds, as well as the agency that's administering the ARPA funds, because the process is cumbersome, and particularly the ARPA reporting is a lot of work. So we're trying to make that easy and accurate for the agencies that are accessing funds and our entity that it's administering it, so we can stay within the guardrails and not have any issues with the feds when it comes time to report on all these projects.
All right, great. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Dennis Gallet, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a great conversation. It's always good to hear from you.
Great to be with you, Ben. Take care, everybody.
All right, thanks.
Coming up next.
With us now is Steve Kamey, Director of Identity Solutions for U.S. Public Sector at Okta. Steve, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Jake, it's a pleasure. Good morning to you.
So Steve, at Okta, you're working hand in hand with state and local governments and higher education across the country on all things identity. And naturally, today we're at the IT Modernization Summit. So let's start with, how do you see the role of identity in the modernization efforts that you're seeing across SLED?
One of the things I find really interesting across the nation as we see state and local governments embracing the experience. They're recognizing that, like, look, we can't continue to have this old legacy type of approach where we log into different agencies and we got different experiences across the board. We've got all this outdated technology. We've seen how that can hinder efforts like things like pandemic assistance and stuff like that. So it's encouraging to see the focus on modernizing different applications, making them more consistent across all levels of government, but also making it really, really simple for the people, the American public, to get into these systems, right? We all know that we can't continue to manage different credentials for different agencies. We all know the weaknesses around passwords and things like that. So what we're starting to see is this increased focus on not only the user experience, but also keeping people, in control of their accounts in a way that makes it really simple and easy on them. At the federal level, they talked about this idea called a time tax, right? This idea of how long it takes and the frustration of dealing with the government, and how the focus on trying to minimize that that friction, right, when dealing with the government. So by putting the focus on the people who are actually, either getting the services from the government, right, or interacting with them, it's making it a whole new world, right, in terms of, state and local modernization.
So, I mean, it makes sense that identity really is a crucial part of how all of these different modernization projects happen. But I mean, how do you see the thinking around identity really taking shape with the folks that you're talking to?
I think we're realizing that as the modernization efforts take shape, right, and we take a look at all the different applications that are moving to the cloud and so forth, a lot of what we're hearing in terms of these discussions is that how vital the role of identity is. Almost like identity is like critical infrastructure, right? When you think of like a power utility, electricity, right? It's so ubiquitous, but yet we all depend on it. We almost don't think about it. We expect it to work. We expect it to work with anything. It's not, it's platform neutral, right? You can plug anything in and get the power that you need from it. And that's kind of the analogy that we're starting to see when agencies and even higher ed come to us and talk to their approach about not only identity, but also, managing the access. We're hearing, because identity is such critical infrastructure, that we have to approach it in a different way. I mean, a lot of times in the past, identity has been baked into the specific applications, or they've been bolted on later. And I think that's how we got to where we are now, right? So this renewed focus on making identity a standalone piece of core infrastructure and taking a hard look of how we approach that. I think that's something really encouraging, right, to see across the the industry in terms of accomplishing these goals, right? Keeping people in control of their accounts, making their lives easier.
It feels like as the industry is growing and as CIOs and CTOs are doing more and more citizen facing or public facing or even employee facing projects, that technology like identity is one of those bedrock sort of foundational pieces of all the puzzles. And it makes sense, right? Think about identity in our daily lives, right? When we if you lose your ID, you're kind of out of luck. Your life is very difficult for a while. And so how do you see that sort of thinking more at the less technical but more foundational level about the approach? How do you see that in that lens of identity as critical infrastructure taking shape with CIOs and CTOs?
Yeah, I think it sort of relates to what we were talking about in terms of like, the neutrality type of approach. Like when we go back to that sort of analogy of like a power utility, think about identity like that, like a utility, right? But one that's unique in that it works with basically anything, right? So the approach that we take is, put that identity, make it work with any application, whether it's a cloud application, whether it's still, legacy, right? It might still be on premise for a while, or it should be able to ease your transition, to the cloud. So the approach that we're taking in terms of, making it simple and easy, making these pre-built integrations, right? That kind of thing that speeds the time right, to the IT modernization, I think is so essential, right? So when we take a look at that, and like I said, you can plug identity into just about anything. That's the way, we're kind of thinking about it.
And so you talked about cloud, obviously identity currently has to bridge that gap, but it's no secret that every survey of state and local government CIOs shows a pretty rapid migration to the cloud post-pandemic. If it wasn't
That's
underway
right.
before, it's really underway now. And so none of what we're talking about would really be possible at this sort of scale without the cloud. So tell me about how you're seeing that approach to cloud change across the public sector.
Well, it's definitely, increasing on the list of, top priorities. NASIO publishes their top 10, on a regular basis, right? And, obviously cybersecurity and risk management, tend to rise to the top there. But adopting cloud services, I think for 2022, it's number 4, right? And it's obviously closely related to number 5, which was, legacy modernization. The state and local governments, higher education, they're realizing that the push to the cloud and the relation between that and IT modernization, right? They go hand in hand. Right. But so when we take a look at identity as a primary cloud, right, one of the approaches that that Okta takes, for example, is when we look at identity and we can put that in a cloud that works with anything, right, aligns with the same common goals that we've just described, and driving that type of efficiency, right, by putting that in a primary cloud, agencies can, across the entire, let's picture all the different agencies in a given state, right, each one trying to do identity, and all the people who are trying to work on the core mission of providing services to the public are not working on identity any longer, right? It's powerful, right? They're actually being able to go and adopt a trusted cloud, something that's always on, worked, high availability, right? So I think that's a new way of thinking about identity and what relates directly to the the overall modernization goals.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I think the event is focused on modernization, but of course we can't ignore the ever-present looming idea, concept, threat, terrifying thing that is security. How should in your opinion, the SLED vertical be thinking about security? And we're hearing so much about zero trust nowadays in the context of these modernization discussions.
Yeah, I wonder how many people hear zero trust and like, oh, not another discussion on zero trust. I mean, obviously, we think of zero trust in terms of cyber modernization, right? It's that whole new approach to thinking about security and how we can't keep building walls, right? We've learned over decades that building walls and trying to keep bad guys out, obviously that doesn't work. But it's fantastic to see at the federal level, and as you know, the state and local tends to, kind of take a playbook out of the federal government. Obviously there's an executive order on cyber modernization, legitimizing the term zero trust across the government. A lot of publications have been coming out, like this special publication 800-207 puts together a zero trust architecture with like 7 core tenets that clearly describe what zero trust is. So it's not a buzzword, right? And we're seeing, across, state, local, governments that they're adopting zero trust too, right? So what's fantastic about this is that by modernizing, cybersecurity relates to IT modernization, we can rip a playbook out of the federal government and take a look at some of these best practices. I was just going to point out one thing that one of the guidance that's helping federal agencies adopt zero trust is what's called the CISA zero trust maturity model, right? It's helping anybody, right? A state and local agency or even an enterprise organization, but it's also for the federal government as well, is to be able to help agencies go from a perimeter-based, type of approach to an optimal zero trust, architecture. And when you take a look at it, they've got a really simple approach. There's 5 pillars of zero trust, and the first one is identity, right? And there's really simple, basic things that they're putting out there that any organization can do to help along the path towards, cyber modernization with zero trust. So just to sort of wrap this up, it's things like centralized identity management. It's things like providing phishing resistant MFA, like not just basic, MFA that can be phished, but things that, that actually keep, people in control of their accounts. And also doing things like building device, level, things like, the posture of a device into the authentication process. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but when you take a look at that CISA zero trust maturity model, it's pretty compelling. Right. And there's a reason why it starts with identity, because it underpins every single zero trust effort underway.
So all of this talk about identity, really sets us up to talk a little bit about what this next wave in the industry is. And so, how do you see the industry evolving toward a future maybe without passwords?
Can you imagine? no more passwords anymore. And actually, you know, the industry is making that a reality, right? We're already starting to see it in our consumer lives. There's technology called like WebAuthn, for example, that we're starting to see more adopted. And that's obviously, you know, going to probably be, you know, more widely adopted as we move forward. You know, we here at Okta, we're embracing that type of newer technology. We're also doing things like, you know, like I had mentioned before, tying into things like the actual device itself, right? Because identity isn't, you know, we might talk about it as a primary cloud, but it absolutely needs to integrate with everything else. If you're doing the authentication process, if we're taking a look at that device and there's a potential risk on that device, we ought to rethink, right, that authentication process. Or maybe if someone's already currently logged in and device posture changes. So that idea of, you know, the future of, you know, a passwordless, you know, type of a future where we're also constantly thinking about the changing cybersecurity landscape, it's possible, right? And it's coming.
Steve, such a pleasure to chat with you today. Thanks for being with us.
And you as well, Jake. Thank you so much.
And we have more great sessions for you today as part of the IT Modernization Summit. Stay tuned.
Coming up next.
I'm with Tarek Tomes, Chief Information Officer for the state of Minnesota, and J.R. Sloan, CIO for the state of Arizona. Tarek, J.R., good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be here today.
So let's talk a little bit about the cloud, right? We've been talking about the cloud for years, but I feel like cloud has had such a journey in state government over the last decade. I mean, just a few short years ago, state CIOs were only moving some or a little of their workloads to the cloud, and now it's near ubiquitous. So JR, let's go to you to start. When you're looking at IT modernization, how are you pushing to modernize to the cloud, and why?
So I think we go back to the core reasons why really were around, I'll say, the economics and how it supports the business. And that has to be an underlining theme, right, of any decision or discussion you're having around, well, do we go to the cloud? Don't we go to the cloud? But the reality is that for the things that we have to do in states, right, enough evidence has been compiled now to demonstrate that, okay, the cloud is capable of running pretty much any workload that you really need to do. You can be just as secure in the cloud as you can on premise. And then it comes down to, I think, analyzing, like, where are you in your investment cycles for things that you had on, in your premise environment, and where those refresh cycles are, your data centers. For Arizona, we hit an inflection point several years ago that just made sense for us to start pushing harder in that direction, and that's why we've made the progress that we have. I think different states will be at different places, right? I know that about the time that Arizona was making our moves to more aggressively adopt cloud, other states were making significant investments in state-owned data centers, right? So they were doing significant infrastructure investments in one or more data centers to support their needs. So that, to honor the stewardship of tax dollars, right, you need to ride those investments out and make sure that there's a good return on those investments. But I think as we're looking forward, cloud adoption, that's where the applications are coming. I think for me, the biggest benefit is I don't think the state in government in general is going to add a lot of value in owning a facility and owning that infrastructure and managing it and scaling it up and down. I think we're better as consumers of those technologies from providers that's their core business, and to work with good technology partners.
So Tarek, I'm curious your perspective here, and sort of the same kind of question your way. I mean, how are you driving some of your modernization projects to the cloud, and why are you choosing cloud for that purpose?
Well, thank you, Jake, and certainly echo everything that JR said, and it certainly mirrors much of our principles and practices and our perspectives. I think we have a responsibility to meet people where they are at, and digital is as much a location as a physical space. And one of the key drivers for us in the work that we do is the time to return value, and making sure that we're ready to use the tools that are available for us to meet upon those objectives. We're quite intentional about our approach. One of the things that we're very proud of is we have created what we refer to as a modernization playbook. And it's really a playbook not just for technologists, but for our business partners as well to undertake these enormous journeys. 10, 12 years ago, we were the first state in the country that adopted a communication and collaboration platform, which is now Office 365. At that time, it was something branded a little bit differently. But we have always strongly believed that we have to use those things that are available to us to derive as much value as quickly as possible. And we certainly, throughout the pandemic, saw many instances where the cyclical demands of capacity really didn't warrant making an investment in that peak cycle, but you had to be able to throttle up and you have to be able to throttle back down. And certainly those constructs, as JR mentioned, in terms of being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, are really essentially provided to us in the cloud. And then, not last but not least, we do frequently find that our cyber posture improves dramatically and quite significantly. Our ability to recover, our ability to react and respond, our ability to protect is frequently much higher when we're adopting these cloud constructs.
So one of the biggest challenges that cloud has presented government has been figuring out how to pay for it in a way that made sense for government budgets. So Tarek, how are you helping folks understand this and sort of get behind it? And what does that look like in Minnesota?
I love this question. And I think, there's certainly a lot of complexity in this question. And I think there's a lot for government to still unpack. For quite some time, over a decade, we have essentially been a fee-for-service organization, meaning that our agency partners and customers, they pay for the services that we provide based on what they consume. And as such, they have long been in an OpEx model. And so we have supported, that ability to understand the total cost of services, derive the unit of measurement of consumption, if you will, and then charge our customers for those services. I think one of the things that is really, really important for us is we're really undertaking, as a part of our modernization playbook and our transformation efforts, a really big change from a project approach to a product approach. And those cycles are going to be really important, I think, for government, in that you can't serve people when you find one-time investments to move the ball just a little bit and then they lay dormant again. Those things that are most important that we're serving Minnesotans with have to have continual investments from a product perspective. And the OpEx model, I think, is really significant towards that.
And JR, same to you. I mean, how are you driving that mindset shift from CapEx to OpEx in Arizona?
Yeah, so a little bit different than Tarek. Like I'll say, as Tarek was talking about the fact that I think because they're in a more consolidated model, their agencies were already consuming in an OpEx. We didn't have that here, right? So, we've been having to put together the playbook for how to do cloud adoption and how for each agency to go through that CapEx to OpEx transition. And when we set forth our cloud first and cloud smart policies, we included things like, hey, we know we need to have we made sure we included 2 full budget cycles in the planning before we had our deadlines in of, you need to be done by this point, to allow agencies the opportunity to assess, to plan, to budget, because when you go through that transition, there is some overlapping investment that needs to occur because you've got to keep your current infrastructure up and running while you're bringing up your new stuff in the cloud. And you're gonna learn some lessons along the way, and you need to plan for that transitional expense. But to get to that OpEx model, I absolutely echo everything that Tarek is saying. Is that those are the benefits, right? In the cloud, we get this flexibility, we get elasticity, we get scalability, we get access to services faster. We're able to try things on a much smaller scale. And so all these things help support, what he, I think, Riley was talking about in terms of, the digital experience that we're looking to bring to our constituents.
And when you talk about that planning, I mean, change management is such a key part of how any technology gets implemented in government, but especially for something like cloud. So when you think about that change management piece, I mean, how are you approaching that? And we'll go to you first, Tarek.
I think one of the things as it relates to adoption of cloud and change management is for us to recognize that both modernization and adoption of cloud is not necessarily just a technology thing. It is a whole of government thing. And I think our change management approach has to include that education of our business side leaders related to the capabilities that not only we should be expecting, but that we should really be advocating heavily for. And that includes education frequently of the legislative body, both from a cyber, but also an opportunity perspective. And our citizens, they expect these digital services. They expect these digital services in a timeline that meets them where they are. And certainly, I think during the pandemic, we have all collected a lot of examples of really, really successful digital innovation. And I think our business partners have really seen also a lot of the capabilities and powers and how quickly those can come together. The delineation of the lines between a technologist and the business side and low code, no code, and how we all innovate together is one of the areas that I think is going to be really this fundamental shift for government.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, JR, I'm curious what you think here. I mean, what's unique about how you need to approach something like change management when it comes to cloud?
So I think everything that Tarek said, I think is going to apply across the board, right? Talking to your business stakeholders, your legislative stakeholders, they all need to be educated and brought up to speed on the what, the why, and the how of cloud, and what is it like? What's in it for them at the end of the day? And why are you doing this? Now, the other side, I want to do the and onto everything that Tarek said was we did a lot of focus on change management, internally. And so this was taking our folks that were the server administrators, right, getting down on the front lines, and helping those guys understand that the server administrator today, your cloud administrator tomorrow, your job is going to change. You're going to go from being really good at configuring, racking, stacking, plugging things in, going and touching things physically in the data center to now you're going to be able to manage, instead of being able to maybe manage tens or hundreds of virtual machine environments, you can manage thousands in a cloud environment, and we're going to train you on that. And so, and as Tarek said, it's a lot of investment in coaching, communicating, investing in that training, and it's also a double-edged sword, right? As we got efficiencies and economies for making those investments and moving and getting into cloud. We had some folks that got some great career opportunities because they got well trained and they were skilled up, and there's demand for them elsewhere in the market. And that's a good thing, right? It's hard, but it's also a good thing because people got to advance in their careers. And so that's all part of this process is how we make sure that we have the right talent that's skilled up. The fact is that anyone that's doing a job today, even our like we went through a mainframe transition, right? So when you talk about those things where it's like what happens to those people? Well, our folks, through the agreement that we had in place, they ended up becoming, they were rebadged as employees with the provider that we went forward with. They got raises, they got payouts for their accrued vacation time, and they now serve a larger community, not just us. And so their skills are even in greater demand and highly valued. And yet it also offloaded a risk that the state was carrying that, that population of folks that know how to do those things on mainframes is diminishing. So it really was a win-win for us and really has helped us to move forward.
Yeah, I think training is one of those really key words. And so Tarek, I'm going to take it over to you. When you look at the workforce side of the migration and transition to cloud, I mean, what does that mean for you in the context of cloud and in the context of IT modernization?
I really love what JR said about, training people and some are going to receive better opportunities. Of course, retention of our talented folks is important to us. And we want to always make sure that we maintain and create a culture where people want to be with us. But there's a certain amount of pride also when people move on and have greater career opportunities. If you draw the sports analogy, from a coaching perspective, to see assistant coaches move on to become head coaches is a good thing, is a healthy thing. And one of the things that's really important for us is to create this learning culture, to create opportunities for our employees to seek new career opportunities. We just recently launched a cloud-based learning challenge where we put together a cloud curriculum. We have 2,500 technologists within our organization. We got over 1,000 technologists that self-opted into this cloud learning challenge. I always think of it, from the perspective of, sure, you may invest, heavily in people, and that may mean that some of them may leave. But if you don't invest in your people and they stay, it probably is actually a lesser result or a less desirable result. And so I think that learning culture and understanding and embracing that in our space, change is inevitable. Change is a continual and constant part of what we do as technologists is really important.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think that intersection between training and learning and the educating piece that you were talking about earlier, when it means to like educating the legislature, all of that stuff is so interconnected and so important to drive this stuff forward. And speaking of forward, let's pull it all together. What does all of this stuff mean, right? From the migration to cloud to paying to cloud, what does all of this mean for the future of government, and what innovation does this enable? So let's go to you first, JR.
Well, so I'll say the next things are really on deck for us, right? We've done our initial kind of lift and get to the cloud. We're shifting our focus now to say, okay, now how do we do this as efficiently as we can possibly do it, right? We had stood up along the way, Cloud Center of Excellence and Cloud Steering Committees where we do information and knowledge sharing, and so we get our guys that are the best at what they do and get them sharing information together. But we're actually now applying a formal maturity model like CMMI, but there's a cloud maturity model that's been developed. I think Tarek's aware of it as well. It's been publicized through NASIO. Accenture had a hand in helping to develop that. But we're going to take that, and over the course of this year, we're actually assessing ourselves and saying, how are we doing at this? And how can we demonstrate that we are getting better and more efficient at how we utilize the cloud and optimize what we're doing there. So I think that's part of the operational next steps. And then we want to continue going back to some of the early comments I think that Tarek had, is like, so how are we tapping the capabilities and the possibilities of the cloud to drive innovation and to drive accelerated delivery of better services, that incremental and continual investment in citizen experience and providing that better overall interaction with government that our citizens really need.
And Tarek, I'm gonna leave it to you to bring it all home here. I mean, what is all this stuff that we're talking about? What does it mean for the future of government service in Minnesota, and what innovation does that enable for you?
I think we have to be driven by the innovation, that we create, the opportunities and the outcomes, and also our ability to do that in a way where we reach everyone. The equitable providing of technology services in government is really, really important. And I think we have seen that digital services frequently are a accelerant providing equitable access to different means and mechanisms. Certainly the digital divide is very real, and our need to educate people related to digital literacy. But I think digital services is a accelerant as it relates to equity. Cloud constructs provide us access to the same types of things that many of the leading organizations in the world use to innovate and continue to evolve. And we have to stay in lockstep. We have to continue to look and see what happens in the marketplace, and we have to make those same constructs available to ourselves. We have a relatively small example. We recreated an entryway to apply for human services benefits that many Minnesotans rely on, and it reduced the application time period from an hour to 10 minutes. We've had over 500,000 Minnesotans that have walked through that doorway, which is 10 million minutes in time savings. And I think we have to continue to look for those opportunities to bring cloud constructs together with smart partners, together with really smart, dedicated public sector technologists to continue to just move the ball forward in providing value.
Wow, that's That's incredible. That's 10 million minutes. That's no small amount. JR, Tarek, thanks for being with us today. Thanks for sharing your stories about cloud, and look forward to seeing what comes from you each next. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
JR.
Yeah, thank you, Tarek.
Thank you, Jake.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
And stay tuned for more from today's IT Modernization Summit.
Coming up next.
I'm joined now by Tina Karkoff, an industry advisor for SLED at Splunk. Tina, how's it going? Thanks for being here.
It's great. Thank you so much for having me today, Jake.
So, Tina, as we've already heard today, and I'm sure we'll hear more about in the sessions to come, it's such an interesting time for IT modernization in government. One of the big things that's happening, not just in government, but across the board, is what's being called the Great Resignation. From your perspective, I mean, how do you see the Great Resignation affecting state, local, higher ed, and how does that impact how those leaders are approaching modernization?
Yeah, it's such a great question. The Great Resignation has prompted about 40 to 60% of employee resignations across a variety of industries. And of course, some industries are hit a little bit harder. Typically, people are leaving their roles because of a toxic culture. Interestingly, research done by the Sloan School of Management at MIT indicates that money, salary, is number 16 on the list, but in certain industries, that number rises up to the top. So when you look at state and local government, when you look at education, a lot of people are resigning more because of their finances and less because of that culture. And so we always don't have the ability to just throw money at people. We don't have those kinds of budgets in education and government. And so it makes it a little bit harder for us to replace those folks. And so when you talk about modernization, it's a great time for CIOs to look at the things that they can manage and move away from, aging software and hardware solutions and into things that are more innovative, more automative, so that when you have folks that are leaving, those vacancies don't hurt as much.
And so what I'm hearing there is that it's pretty essential to change the approach to hiring, right? You have to sort of think of it a little bit differently. This is something we've been hearing for years, but it sort of takes on a new tune in the lens of the Great Resignation. So when you're talking to leaders across government, across education, how do you advise them to do that? And how can some of the emerging technologies, you mentioned automation, how can some of these technologies that we're talking about pretty regularly in our space help make that happen?
Jake, I love the concept of being a first and third employer. And what I mean by that is that since we don't have the ability to attract really high-end technical skills that come along with those higher salaries, if we're hiring folks that are earlier career, we can't always give them more money, but what we can do is give them experience and we can give them technical skills. So if you hire someone who's earlier in their careers, you teach them the skills that they need to get to those higher level of salary, we know that they're going to leave us and they're going to leave us for more money. That's great. It's very hard for us to compete from a salary perspective, especially in IT. But then when these people get their skills and experience outside of our agencies, they tend to come back. So they come back as managers, they come back as leaders. And so being that first and third employer for these folks is actually a real benefit to us, but it's more of a benefit to them, and they never forget the experience that they got from working in an education, either in government or higher education.
And so, obviously, anytime we're talking about hiring, anytime we're talking about technologies like automation, I mean, this needs money. It needs money to be successful. And so, how are you encouraging some of these leaders when you're having these conversations to advocate for funding? And how does that differing approach really help them build some of that consensus internally to make some of this stuff happen?
I think this is probably one of the most challenging areas for a CIO or for an IT leader is how do I get that funding within the organization? Typically, what I advise clients and customers to do is to work with someone internal to the organization who can be an advocate for the technology that we're seeking funding for. So for example, if we're looking at deploying software that analyzes spending trends and patterns, right? That's a joint initiative with finance. If we're looking at installing a new ERP system, again, that's an implementation that's going to touch finance and a lot of other areas of the organization. What I always recommend in terms of those financing requests is that CIOs have the ability to justify their purchase by showing the value that it brings to the business. And so if we're solving finance problems, if we're solving enrollment challenges, if we're speeding up the process of applicants coming into a university, for example, those are all business problems that it has a part in solving. And when we're asking for funding, it's important that we show that value across the funding spectrum.
I want to go back to a point that you made earlier. You were talking about automation, and let's drive this home a little bit more. Tell me a little bit about how you're seeing leaders sort of consider, look at, implement some of these more automation-based technologies to sort of lift the burden off of that workforce, especially in light of these changing conditions that we're talking about.
Yeah, it's a good question. A great application of automation is found in security. So anytime that you can take large amounts of data and automate the patterns and trends that we're seeing across that data, that's a perfect example of automation. When you look at the security spectrum in any organization, it would be near impossible for a single person or even a team of people to review all the trends that they're seeing across network data that comes through different systems. So deploying something that implements that process means that you need fewer eyes on the data that's actually coming out. Using predictive analytics, for example, to make student registration process more Amazon-like contributes to overall student success. So if a student took these 4 or 5 classes last semester, what are the recommendations that we're going to make for next semester? And oh, by the way, if Johnny got a C in math, do we want to recommend the next hardest class, or do we want to recommend something where he has a better chance of succeeding? And so the predictive analytics, deploying software that automates a process, anytime that you can do that, then you need less eyes on the process itself. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily need less employees, but you can free those employees up to work on more important things.
And let's stay on the topic of automation for a bit. I mean, I think that it's an increasingly large piece of the modernization conversation, but I know that some government leaders are wary of saying that automation is the solution to everything. I mean, how do you think automation and whether that's RPA or any of the applicable uses of it, how do you think automation is fitting into the greater modernization conversation in government and higher ed?
I think it fits in from the perspective that the role of IT to an organization has changed. And so, we used to just keep the lights on. Infrastructure had to work, applications had to be present. Now we look at the fine-tuning of all of that. So if my application is experiencing downtime, then it's not present for the users. And automation helps us to detect problems before they actually become apparent to the user base. And so when you're looking at using automation from strictly an IT perspective, you're looking at automating the processes that take place in an IT environment and using that automation to become more efficient in the services that you're offering to the rest of your customers.
And so you talked about the changing role of the IT organization. And so all of this, everything that we're talking about so far seemingly culminates in the changing role of the CIO itself, right? Whether that's the CIO, CTO, in certain places, obviously called different things, but all of this, culminates in sort of that changing of that job. And it's something that NASIO is talking a lot about. It's something that EDUCAUSE is talking a lot about. A bunch of these organizations that are the stakeholders of those CIOs are concerned, excited, apprehensive, all sorts of things about this changing role. I mean, how do you see that changing job taking place? How do you see it continuing to evolve going into the future?
So I think in years past, CIOs built credibility on up and down time. Our systems are on, everything's working, we have credibility. Now we build credibility by focusing on business outcomes. So IT is so much more than just focusing on the information technology that supports an organization. We need to understand what the organizational goals are and then support those goals with technology. When you can explain those benefits and how they apply to funding requests, for example, new services, a departure from relying on CIO solely as a service provider, that's where the rubber meets the road. And CIOs should always look to partner with the business to show that business value and how it contributes to the organizational strategy. So many organizations are reflecting on where they've been. They look at how they've adapted to rapid changes, how they want to evolve, grow, and scale. And everything that that organization looks to do has an IT component. So looking at not only the personal networks that an organization has, but looking at the technological networks, how they're set up, and how agile are they? Can we adapt on the fly? Can we move to cloud quickly? Can we really improve the services and the business outcomes? The role has significantly changed with regard to those things.
Tina, I think that's all the time we have today, but super excited to have you here. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jake. I appreciate it.
And stay tuned for more from today's IT Modernization Summit.
Coming up next.
Well, thanks, State Scoop, for having me, Jake, to the entire team. As always, doing a great job. I hope everybody is having a great time at the event, and appreciate you spending just a little bit of time with us here as we look at what it looks like to modernize state technology in Florida. The tremendous progress that's been made over the last couple of years, not quite as quickly as some of us would like, but also the long committed journey that I and our entire administration are on to make sure that state technology in Florida finally delivers the kind of values to our constituents that are overdue and also expected and should be the baseline role of providing secure and modernized government services. For those of you unfamiliar with the history of Florida and state technology, we've got a little bit of a sordid past. I, for one, as our state CIO and in charge of the Florida Digital Service, and quite frankly, grateful for the fact that we get to start with kind of a blank canvas and also a history of different approaches that maybe have been more safe or slow or bureaucratic that all led to the demise of those particular offices. We have 4 times in the state of Florida defied the law of bureaucracy, often joked about, right, that if government creates something, that program will exist in perpetuity. And that's typically true, but Florida has been so good at doing state technology bad in previous iterations that we've had the legislature or the executive move to abolish those offices 4 times prior. And so we at the Florida Digital Service understand the stakes, understand the charge, the expectation of Governor DeSantis and the legislature to make sure that state technology is delivering the value both inside government as well as externally to our constituents. And so that's really where the Florida Digital Service comes to play. But when you ask yourself kind of what does it take to defy the law of bureaucracy, or how do you calculate the price of not getting state technology right? Looking at just one category of projects, those are projects in excess of $10 million, which are projects that we at the Florida Digital Service and some of our predecessors were responsible for doing project oversight on. From 2005 to 2020, there were 5 agency projects that were projects larger than $10 million that were so off the mark in the eyes of the legislature that the legislature actually quit funding and canceled those projects, resulting in $157.5 million almost of funds that were spent on something that never actually came to fruition. And then similarly, there were 7 projects in that same category, $10 million or more, that were so over budget that we spent $327.5 million more than was ever anticipated to be spent on those projects at the jump. And then when you kind of enter into where security plays a role and what legacy systems can mean, both for inefficient services, either to the employees using those systems to deliver services in government or the constituent that's receiving services from government. According to the FBI, we were actually 4th, unfortunately. A lot of times you want to rank highly in rankings. $295 million in cyber crimes in the state as a whole just shows you how large the economic impact is, both public and private sector. Now, that's not $295 million of government cost to those cyber crimes specifically, but a large number of those cyber crimes actually do involve government services or could be mitigated by government services. And so I want to take just a minute or so to talk about the Florida Digital Service for those of you who are not familiar with kind of what we are and what we're not. But we were established in 2020 as kind of the latest iteration to try and get an entity fully responsible for state technology is, as I like to say, one throat to choke. And having been a recovering legislator that spent about a decade working on technology policy, the Florida Digital Service was really kind of the first year of about 3 years of planned reforms to look at what it really looks like to have one throat to choke with a clearly defined mission, an empowered but also accountable organization. And so the digital service was created in 2020. We were charged with creating innovative solutions that securely modernize state government. We partner with all state agencies to lead state technology in the future. But one common misconception, and it's a real challenge sometimes to manage the calendar, as we sit here today, the digital service is highly consultative and highly influential on programs that provide constituent-facing technology, but we currently do not own, operate, or manage directly any constituent-facing technologies. And then following the establishment in 2021, we were actually designated the lead entity on cybersecurity in 2021, responsible for a whole host of cybersecurity responsibilities. As we walk through, I'm going to use cybersecurity a little bit both as a parallel because I think it's fundamental to modernization, but also as an example as we in Florida move on more than about $175 million in application modernization funding that just went into law with the turn of the fiscal this past July 1. To give you an example, or not an example, but to give you an overview of the Florida Digital Service kind of moving beyond maybe the mission statement and core responsibilities is to look at how we're organized. My role as a state CIO is defined in statute. So too is the chief data officer and the chief information security officer. The service experience office is something we created to be the single source of routing. It is the customer service, the constituent experience office that also has to do the technology project support and oversight. And then a kind of a COO or administrative office that liaises and interfaces with the back office support we get out of the Department of Management Services that does all of our budget, procurement, policy, rulemaking, and then grant creation and management. But really, when you think about kind of the application modernization or the just modernization in general of IT, OT, and the technology stack, all four of these offices are really directly involved. The chief data officer has a core function of running an enterprise data catalog to identify all the data elements across state government, to identify where they are housed, and then also to then begin doing and facilitating data interoperability across state agencies. The state CISO is responsible for operating this first cybersecurity operations center in state history. So all operations and incident response, systems management, and design, as well as planning. So looking at architecture, governance, risk compliant. I like to think of the two functions in security as what are we doing today, and then separate and apart from that, what are we doing tomorrow, and how do we plan for that? Service experience does a lot of the implementation, a whole host of the procurement reforms and procurement consulting. Adam Taylor's our chief of service experience, my direct report there, does a phenomenal job working across agencies with his team to help them procure more efficiently. And I think one of the things that, if I made one plug real quick, that's not, often thought of in modernization is we like to think about the technology. We don't always think about reforming the way we buy. And if I was to describe maybe the biggest wake-up call that I've had in a lifetime of private sector to now taking the first government job and likely the only government job I ever have, it's nobody warned me how hard it is to buy something. And so really being efficient on how that procurement process and those procurement reforms run is a core focus of ours, and Adam's team there in the service experience office runs it. And then in that COO office, that's where we do our governance, our regulatory authority, our grant creation, grant management to kind of fund. And so if I were to sum up maybe the way that org chart looks, it's to say modernization takes a lot. But at the simplest level, it takes policy and it takes money. The policy being kind of the authority, the accountability, the responsibility that sets the stage in government to say who's responsible for what, is something actually a deliverable, and then obviously the money to kind of make it work, right? So if we're to look just kind of at the digital service in general and what our role in modernization policy looks like, number one, we have to establish and operate, as I mentioned, Florida's first CSOC to actually run enterprise cybersecurity across all of state government. And as of this past legislative session, through $30 million in grant funding we'll touch on in a second, actually run cybersecurity in coordination with local government as well. So really understanding what it looks like to secure the entire enterprise and understanding that the threat actor doesn't care about branches of government or separations of power or any other wholly appropriate and really important constitutional protections that exist to protect our constituents and to separate and limit government's ability to take over and control certain things. Our job, as I tell people, is to make sure that innovation fits within the Constitution, not to try and change the Constitution, but it's really encouraging to see local government reaching out, state government reaching out to say, hey, we're in this boat together. And so how do we work as a team and maintain those either separations of power between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, or just levels of government? Florida recognizing sovereign constitutional officers at the local government level that don't really have to play with us and could say no. But we're really seeing a lot of lean in there. So that's one of our statutory responsibilities that lays a huge predicate. And we'll dive into the example. I'm going to use that as an example because it really does touch on the pathway to modernization in large scale here. Technology procurement standards and reforms, I touched on it, but if it takes you forever to buy and you can't buy what you need to buy, you're just not going to be successful. And so how do you navigate the existing authorities? Alternate contract sources are something that we're really big on. Trying to educate people that if something has already been competitively procured, there should be a really good reason to go competitively procure it again. So kind of inverting I think the traditional government buying model, where I think traditionally you spend a lot of time in alphabet soup of, drafting an RFP or an ITN or an RFI or any other three-letter acronym that stood for, we're not really sure what we need, so let's go through this big laborious process. We're inverting it, and I'm challenging my team, go do the discovery work, meet with people to do, proof of concepts and budget exercises to figure out, what it really looks like and to find the best fit for the need within the ecosystem or the chessboard that we have to play on. And then if that's available by an alternate contract source, have the courage to say, we're going to take risk, we're going to be innovative, we're going to stand by the decisions we make, but let's get to action. And those procurement standards and reforms are a major part of where we're doing that. The enterprise data catalog, obviously, if I were to say what is the single most important word with respect to modernization, it is data. It drives everything. And so the enterprise data catalog, being able to identify every data element, where it is, the application or legacy system, and then the dictionary work to identify what it means is just a critical component to modernization. And we at the digital service have to do that. But then the data interoperability or data sharing as a service stuff starts to really give the incentive to the different agencies. It starts to really give them a value. It helps them understand, hey, if I'm going to run this data catalog tool and I'm going to do the data dictionary work, what do I get out of it? And the data interoperability piece is a statutory responsibility of ours, but another real example of where we can go deliver value to the different agencies and their leadership. And then rulemaking. So in Florida, we have statute and obviously rule, as I think most other jurisdictions do. But we have broad rulemaking authority over the enterprise architecture, cybersecurity for state government, cloud first policy for state government, which I wish we could kind of change to cloud smart, but the policy there being cloud smart. And then technology project oversight are things that we have governance authority over. So doing a heavy level of iterative policy governance work to make sure that we set the stage for the entire ecosystem in Florida to be successful. And I think, one thing maybe to point out that I should have talked about at the jump, but is a key component of the pathway to modernization, is understand the ecosystem that you're in. And in Florida, we are a heavily decentralized model. So I know some of my other peers around the country have a very authoritative, almost, I joke, there's monarchs, there's oligarchs, there's anarchy. We're trying to build a center of excellence, right? That says, we're not going to be a super centralized thing. It's just not what we are in Florida. And it's quite frankly not what I want the digital service to be. We're also not going to be anarchy with no standards. I think our recipe, our pathway is the right recipe for the org chart of state government in Florida, the different dynamics, the different governance structures, and the like. What I would encourage anybody to do that's kind of looking to say, hey, how do I take what's worked in Florida over the last 2 years to go from, a perennial loser on the state technology front
to a state that's starting to, I think, quite frankly, lead the way in a lot of ways. It's to understand the ecosystem you're in. So looking at those policy powers and authorities to say, how do I use those to set the stage and get the value demonstrated that I need to go from, okay, is this thing viable? Is the digital service, this startup in government viable? And I think having passed the viability test, now it's, hey, how do I scale? And so looking at, additional funds, but also processes to make sure that everything we're doing is repeatable and scalable. When we look at what's happened over the last couple of years, this is just a high level of what I would call modernization funding. So I mentioned cybersecurity funding being a key part of modernization in our playbook. You look at really two different buckets of money. There's $85.5 million just to the digital service before you count $37 million that's running through one of our universities and a cyber institute there to do statewide training, as well as risk assessment focused on critical infrastructure. And then in addition to that, there's more than $173 million to look at app modernization and cloud migration. The $163 million is specifically focused on retiring legacy systems, as well as migrating off of antiquated and oftentimes end of life or unsupported hardware and software in an on-premise environment to a cloud, as well as $10 million to move existing workloads right now, not necessarily app mod and then migrate. So that's just a high level of kind of the money and the funding here in the state of Florida. I'm going to kind of transition to design, and I'm going to use the CSOC as a design. I talked about kind of understanding your ecosystem, understanding your chessboard, but I kind of sum up design of programs into really three choices, and there's pros and cons to both. There are assets and liabilities to every skill set, every entity, everything, as well as every concept. And so, we looked at the CSOC and had a blank canvas. I think kind of uniquely in money, had no operation, not a lot of process and policy and procedure in place, but a healthy investment of funding. And so in looking at that blank canvas, we said, okay, you could build with a single stack. In this case, we could look at a single cloud vendor or a single cybersecurity vendor. Like I said, this is just to use the SOC as an example. But if we were to look at cloud and say, we could go single cloud, we could go multi-cloud. We could look at our modernization strategy and say, hey, single dev shop, it's going to be internal to government, or we could facilitate a large number of outsourced DevOps shops to come in and help do. We could also go buy commercial off the shelf. And so in looking at that, if we really kind of sum it up, there's single stack or single source, which is to say, hey, I'm going to go find one vendor to either give me everything off the shelf or to do one vendor in a SaaS buy. The pro is it's a little faster, it's a little easier. You don't necessarily have some of the integration challenges. It's one throat to choke on just the simple delivery process. But there's also downsides, and those downsides are that I'm not getting to take the best of a number of different products, that I am kind of married in that relationship. You make a decision to launch a state SOC with either option one or number two, and that's like a marriage with kids. They don't break up and separate very easily. Just because of the complete codependence that happens there. And so this new trend of systems integrators has shown up, I think, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, really gaining prominence, where not necessarily picking a single stack on technology, but a single systems integrator where I outsource the vendor to do the integration and technology decision-making and maybe even implementation operations and reporting. And so it's kind of like a co-pilot model that I know Jake, a lot of your audience is familiar with. Number three, I think, quite frankly, doesn't happen very often in government, because you kind of have to be a little bit crazy and a little bit risk obsessive to take the risk involved with number three. The risk involved with number three is that you look like a complete moron, that you get it all wrong. The upside, the asset to number three, is it's a federated and decentralized model that says, hey, if I have a hub for whatever the thing is, in this case, the SOC, but if I have a hub that can run that federated model to support a multi-vendor and vendor agnostic approach that says, hey, look, you can run different systems, different solutions, and different processes, as long as the center of excellence is kind of the end destination. And ultimately, we picked number three for the CSOC. For those of you looking at how we would approach cloud, you can probably assume pretty strongly that we're going to be a multi-cloud state. And we're fortunate that we have a blank canvas on that front as well. But for the same reasons that kind of articulated here, that we looked at building the SOC out with a multi-vendor and vendor agnostic approach, we wanted to establish a single point of ingestion, translation, and access for what that thing is, right? There needs to be one home base or one hub that the spokes can run off of. But if you can get that right, then you get the upside of avoiding becoming completely dependent on a single vendor. You get the upside of providing access to a host of tools in the SOC world, and I'll touch on function here in a second. But I don't want to be in a situation where I'm saying that the state's endpoint solution is SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, Defender, or anything else. I want to be able to look at it and say, hey, for the agencies or entities that have already invested in 5, 6, 7 different very competent functions, solutions, processes, or teams, I don't want to come to you and tell you rip that out, start over. I need to meet you where you are and give you an experience that says, hey, you've invested in, we're not going to pick one winner. We're going to support the marketplace approach in the ecosystem. And so by not requiring the agencies to adopt single technology stacks, one of the things that I think is really important for those of us that have to manage an ecosystem of agencies is, good management is rewarding good behavior and discouraging bad behavior. Well, I have 5 different endpoint solutions, let's say EDRs in play across state government. And then I have a lot of agencies who haven't even begun doing endpoint. If we show up and say, hey, you have to rip out the one you have, then we're probably not rewarding good behavior where people were moving on their own prior to enterprise security. And we're kind of rewarding bad behavior for folks that get to go up and look like the leader of the class because they can turn on right away, having done nothing previously. And so that we think is a big thing to look at. And then I think the last thing I would stress when we look at topics like modernization is focus on function, not logo. Focus on the job that you're hiring, the company or the application or the solution or the service to do. And so I use this as examples, but this is where I think, asset discovery, this is where I think cybersecurity and the application modernization, and forgive me from coming from just this background, but if I'm a head coach of a football team, the cybersecurity function, my CISO is my defensive coordinator. Their job is to make sure that the bad guys don't put points on the board against us. The modernization side is my offensive coordinator. Their job is to go put points on the board. But if those two coordinators aren't working well together and leveraging what they're seeing from their different vantage points and using the same assets to fit their needs, then we have a problem. And in Florida, we've invested heavily in enterprise cybersecurity. We're going to look at some of these functions, but you can very quickly start to go, wait a minute, how do I do real modernization if I haven't done asset discovery and data catalog? If I don't know where the data is, how can I possibly do meaningful application modernization? Really, all I'm going to do is write the same mainframe application. I'm just going to eliminate COBOL, and I'm going to take all of the functions of that mainframe system and just take it to a modernized language in a modernized hosting environment, and probably not do a lot other than spend a lot more money than needed to actually retire certain functions that might be 50, 60 years old that are no longer relevant. So understanding what assets I have, whether that be on the hardware front, whether that be the client side, server side, whether it be network side or the actual data traversing throughout the ecosystem, discovering the assets in the inventory is, in my belief, the most critical pathway to understand, what's on the chessboard. The way I like to think of it is each of those assets are a different Lego piece that in and of their own right might be significant, but don't really build much, but put together can build something pretty special. In this regard, I talk about the managed SOC and solution, managed SOC services and the solution. What I would stress here when we think about how we do modernization is to say government cannot possibly be the single entity doing the development, the deployment, the testing, the documentation of the services and or the solution. In most of these fronts, specifically on the security front, but we can't possibly hire and then subsequently retain enough talent to do what needs to be done. And so in Florida, we're looking at a hybrid model. The collab that we launched, where we're doing world-class thought leadership and having people fly in from around the country to present on everything from specific functions within security or specific functions within modernization is a great example where we're saying we want to have a hybrid model. We're going to have a competent team that's really talented, doing great work internally, but they're going to interface and work with the best of the best from around the private sector. And I won't walk through all of these functions, but I show them identity and access management is obviously another example where you can't do real modernization of services in any capacity if you can't validate the individual, the application, the organization, or the device to facilitate a secure and subsequently reliable transaction. So I hope that gives just a little bit of an overview of kind of how we're looking at things. There's a whole host of projects across state government. For those of you that are looking to say, hey, how do I take advantage of the funding that's out there on the application modernization piece? One thing I would say is I'm highly consultative. Our team is highly consultative, but really focus on the agency functions. And so get in front of the agencies that have needs to modernize, to present them with, hey, look, here's what it would look like, and even run a proof of concept to scan the environment and say, hey, here's here's workloads that could go to the cloud, but here's also a pathway to modernizing and retiring. We have one system that generates $500 million of revenue for the state that is in critical need, for example, of a refresh. And so getting in front of the agencies at the executive level, both with the secretaries, the chiefs of staff, and the deputy secretaries that are kind of the business or operators, leadership, operational leadership or business leadership, but simultaneously the CIOs as well, and then certainly coordinate with us where we can be helpful. So I've left a couple of email addresses that are kind of routing for us, but service@digital.fl.gov is the best way to get with Adam Taylor's team on the service experience front. So if you have service experience questions in general, but partnering to come to an event in the collab, or getting in front of agency CIOs outside the collab, and just having us help kind of answer and say, hey, here's some folks that might make sense to get in front of on the modernization piece. Service@digital.fl.gov is the place to be. And then security@digital.fl.gov is kind of intake for Jeremy Rogers, our state CISO, and his team. Feel free to shoot something there if you have some modernization ideas or concepts that are kind of security related. Those are the best ways to get us. Getting me, I try to be as responsive as I can. LinkedIn and Twitter, both @JamesGrantFL. I am a little bit slower, candidly, to kind of the cold sales pitch on, hey, we need this in the inbox. I try and keep it to kind of personal correspondence and getting folks in front of the right audience. But Jake, State Scoop, the whole team, I hope that this has been some good time for the audience. To the team that's joined us, thanks for being a part of the ecosystem. At the end of the day, whether it's security, modernization, retiring legacy systems, data privacy, all of these kind of once in a generation tasks that we have in front of us, it's going to take all of us. And so I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. I look forward to catching up with you, and I appreciate you putting up with me. Hopefully I could keep you awake and get you back to what you got going the rest of the program. Jamie Grant signing off from the state of Florida. God bless, and I wish you the best.
Coming up next.
Welcome back to State Scoop and EdScoop's IT Modernization Summit. I'm Benjamin Freed, the managing editor of State Scoop. One of the biggest trends in IT modernization continues to be how governments, especially cities, are charting their post-pandemic courses. Modernization in so-called smart cities can take any number of forms as cities adjust to open-ended remote work and virtual meetings, face new demands for digital services, and face down the uncertain economic conditions we're all living in. To talk about it, I'm joined now by Linda Girol, the Chief Information Officer for San Francisco, and Ted Ross, the CIO of Los Angeles. Linda, Ted, thanks for joining us. I think we're going to have a great conversation. So let's jump right into one of the things I just mentioned. Remote work, virtual meetings, they're not really going away. They appear to maybe be the norm now. So as that's happening, how has that impacted your modernization agendas? And Linda, let's start with you.
Well, it's accelerated our modernization agenda and all of our projects. There's great urgency to, of course, improve our networks, to offer choice on different types of access to the city systems for all our various remote workers. And as we return to the office, there's new urgency to ensure that our systems are being reliable, sustainable, and that we're able to continue all of the good work that was done to fortify our information systems, to make them more secure, and also to continue all of our virtual meetings that the public seem to really appreciate, especially the public meetings for our leadership.
Ted, how about you?
Yeah, I think Linda hit the nail on the head. Technology was important before the pandemic, and it only has increased exponentially since the pandemic. And so I think a lot of organizations like Los Angeles and San Francisco are really using COVID-19 pandemic as a catalyst for modernization strategies, for modernization projects, for great improvements. And I think what's really interesting about remote work is it's not only changed what we do and what we have to focus on, but also how we do it. In 2021, I'll never forget, I had to ask myself the question, have we been more effective or less effective? And in 2021, after the pandemic started, my department actually completed 30%, 30, more IT projects compared to pre-pandemic. And there's a number of reasons why. And so we know that remote work can be very productive. However, we also know that not all aspects of modernization are simply task-based. I'm reminded of a Harvard Business Review article. It was called "When Do We Actually Need to Meet in Person?" Really good read. And it shows us some work is task-based and effective in a virtual setting, but there's still some work that's relationship-based. It's complex. It requires things that are best done in person. So I know at least at Los Angeles, we are starting to prioritize our in-person planning, in-person strategizing, team building, et cetera, so we can ensure that modernization projects continue to stay on track.
And Linda, how's the balance for you in San Francisco?
Well, for all the IT teams in particular, I think we all, as Ted pointed out, I have found that we're very productive on task-based projects remotely. And it has actually even started a push to redesign our workspaces, to actually look at how we bring people back to work and can we save space. And I know our Department of Public Health IT team actually was able to reorganize their schedules and their space and share desks. And now they are lowering the amount of office space that they need, and 2 additional teams have joined their office space. So we're being much more efficient, I think, which lowers our costs, which is so important as we have our cities recovering during the pandemic. So that's a plus.
Yep. Now, you've both had, as a lot of cities have had a lot of support over the last couple of years, but have either of you had to start thinking about doing any belt tightening as conditions have changed?
I can maybe speak to it. COVID is a book of multiple chapters. The first chapter involved rushing, at least in LA, 18,000 plus people to telework. But then the next chapter was an economic crisis in which the city had a separation incentive program, and a lot of senior experienced IT staff and other staff, had an early retirement. Then to another chapter in which there was federal funding, which could be applied to some things, but not others. And so, yeah, we see elements of belt tightening. We also saw elements in which some things did quite well. And I think as we move into a new chapter, we see some additional aspects related to the economy and the stock market, et cetera, which creates another level of belt tightening. So, Ben, it just seems to be a roller coaster ride. It never seems to end, right?
Yeah. And Linda, how about you?
Yes, and I think the challenge of belt tightening causes all of us to be a little more creative, maybe a little more innovative. And we have seen some terrific innovative projects with RPA and really automating the common tasks, the repetitive tasks with standard tool sets that can be applied, and it leaves our staff to handle the more complex work. So we're a big proponent of RPA. And then I think we've also seen an acceleration in data enablement and really looking at how does data serve us? How can we pull down those silos of data in our organizations and share information? I think one of the best testimonies to the use of data, of course, during the pandemic was our wastewater treatment, our public utilities using wastewater treatment samples to detect COVID. And they were so quick at turning around those results they were able to easily see if they had isolated the right people during COVID, especially at our long-term nursing facilities. So this was very exciting and really speaks to how important really looking at our data and making good use of it. So it helps inform decisions. And that's really, I think, one of the other takeaways of this whole process.
Yeah. So I want to move on now, but Ted, you mentioned COVID has been a series of chapters. Well, Los Angeles is about to enter, or it's maybe already entered, another big chapter. You're hosting the Olympics in 6 years. So in addition to requesting my tickets now, what can you tell us about how preparations for literally one of the biggest events on the planet is affecting your job?
Don't misquote me on it, but I'm tired of talking about COVID like many other people are. And I know it's an issue and it's a thing, but I also know that as a city, we are preparing for the 2028 Summer Olympics and Paralympics. And I think it's extremely important that while that runway may seem like a while, we have some pretty intensive infrastructure and technology investments that need to be ready to go to be able to host the world, right? We have in detail a Smart LA 2028 strategy that's online. It talks about many of the projects we have, over 66 different projects on roadmap. It includes infrastructure, it includes digital services, it has data analysis projects, digital equity, and then a section on governance. And some of them are fundamental, right? LA has over 5,000 5G access points now, on the road to over 10,000 by the time of the Olympics. LAX, right, our airport, our infamous airport, is soon to open its 2-mile people mover, which is critical to improving the capacity and the experience of people flying into LA. We also have over 10,000 EV chargers on track for 2024. So we have these fundamental infrastructure projects, and there's quite a few of them. But some of the modernization projects, I think, are really, really cool. For example, we're building what we call the LA Regional Data Marketplace. It's an open source consortium of business to business, business to government, and business to consumer real-time data sharing. It allows businesses, governments, et cetera, a reliable government-run platform for data sharing, and it'll include everything from real-time parking space availability, traffic patterns, public safety information, evacuations. It'll have tens of thousands of different data set opportunities, all to be ready for the Olympics. We also are in the process of integrating 311 with all digital assistants so that we could receive a city service request from Alexa, from Siri, from Google Home, from these kind of natural language processing tools that allow anybody with any device and almost any platform to be able to let us know about a pothole or to ask more information. I think these are super cool projects that we have in place. So while I don't mind working through COVID recovery and economic recovery and all those other aspects, we have a really bright future, I think, ahead of us, in spite of the pandemic.
You mentioned the airport. I know there was some CIO changes there recently. I believe the new CIO of LAX came from San Francisco International. Linda, is that a source? I don't know if that's a source subject, Linda.
Yeah, so we are very fortunate to have very good technology leaders here in San Francisco. And of course, I wish their new CIO for the airport the best of luck, as he is a friend of mine. And I can imagine how innovative and the innovations he'll bring to LA is going to be very, very fun to see and watch.
Yeah.
Linda, thank you very much for
You're very welcome.
Okay.
But when we talk about all of the projects, and you just listed a lot of them that you want to have in place by 2028, I just think historic, we know historically that the Olympics have a very large footprint and can be very disruptive to the host cities. Ted, what are is that something that factors into your considerations? How do you to minimize the potential negative impacts that hosting the Olympics can have?
Yeah, the Olympics have really two key aspects. Number one, a great experience with minimized disruption to the city of Los Angeles. Number two is legacy, right? When we look at 1984 Olympics, it was more than Mary Lou Retton winning an awesome gold medal. It was more than Sam the Eagle, our mascot. It was really about a legacy in which over 800,000 youth were able to participate in no-cost athletics. So like the legacy of the 2028 Olympics becomes extremely important. So there's a lot done. LA is fortunate in the sense that we're very spread out. So we've got facilities that are 100+ miles apart, right? You've got situations in which you've got athletes over at UCLA, events over at Rose Bowl, events in South Los Angeles, over in Carson, you know, at the United Health Center that's there. So we're able to spread it out, try to regionalize, reduce some of the impact, and then really maximize public transportation. I know LA is not known for public transportation, but we've had the 28 by 28 process through Metro, in which for really over the last several years, going all the way to 2028, we have brand new rail, brand new light rail, brand new, you know, last mile types of transportation solutions. So we're really pulling out all the stops to deliver a fantastic Olympic experience, but also one in which we can have infrastructure and a legacy that's useful for the people of Los Angeles for many years after.
Yeah. So I want to bring it back to talking more about cities in general. And the name of this session is Modernization in a Smart City. And that's a term that we've had around for a long time. And it seems to have gone through several different lives, several definitions. Do you have a personal definition of what it means? And, or, you know, how do you even feel about the term smart city, since it can take so many forms? Linda, what do you think?
Well, I think smart cities is a little bit restrictive in the definition, and I think all cities are smart. I think they're probably some of the most difficult problems to solve are city problems, and certainly TED is solving some monster problems, pulling an Olympics through, and I can't wait to see that result. But I think digital cities is more appropriate. And certainly there are so many digital opportunities, everything from infrastructure to digital services to how we interface with our constituents, and really what we deliver and how we deliver it is going through a transformation in government. And this is all, of course, because we are carrying around smartphones in our pockets, and there's so much more available to interact with our residents in that way. And there's also, of course, with all these digital services, such a need for equity. And one of our projects here in San Francisco, of course, is to close that digital divide and for the first time deliver internet service to unserved parts of our community. And that's hard to believe in a 49 square mile city that we would have unserved areas, but there are many. And so really the city is, and our mayor, Mayor London Breed, is very committed to ensuring that our city delivers equitable service, and that includes internet service. So for schools and jobs and healthcare, et cetera, there's nothing more important right now. So that digital equity along with accessibility, and we have a very large focus on all of our digital services around accessibility. So ensuring that disabled and different languages are accessible through our city services that are online. And that takes a re-engineering, it takes some new technology, and that's what we're putting in place.
Yeah, so you would call them, you want to talk about digital cities then?
Yes.
Yeah. Ted, Ted, I think you seem to like smart cities. I mean, you have smart LA, you have smart LA in the title of your plan.
It's true, guilty. Linda raises some really good points. And let's be honest, terms like smart cities or artificial intelligence are often become marketing hype, right? And companies will use those to try to push and sell products. And if you look closely, sometimes you find that there's really not what there should be underneath the hood. And the way I see it is, in a lot of ways, you know, what digital transformation is to business is really what I see as a smart city as to government. It is our version of digital transformation. It's us digitizing paper-based manual processes, bringing them online, integrating them with other processes, focusing on things like user-centered design and user experience. God forbid we actually care how people feel when they're using our service, right? To really improve and reduce frustration, reduce costs, and all those other good things. In Los Angeles, the way we define a smart city is one that uses technology, data, and resources really to improve the quality of life for residents, businesses, and visitors. We see, quote unquote, smart in the sense that it's not just a technology conversation, but it's things like data and even human resources. They play a part of really being a city that coordinates its actions, a digital city, as Linda was describing it. And we like having something of a definition because it allows us to focus in on a North Star. Who are we doing this for? We're not doing this for other government agencies. We're doing this so that the people who live in LA, the businesses that operate in LA, and the people who visit LA can have a fantastic experience. Smart cities are nothing new. For over 100 years, there's been technology in cities. I think, like many of us would agree, the technology available over the last 10 years has been something unique. It's a very impressive toolbox. And I think I really look forward to all the opportunities. Technology is probably one of our greatest solutions, in my opinion, for solving urban challenges. And one of the reasons why is every year we get new technologies and new tools to try to solve them with. In that sense, these really are people challenges, and anything that we can do and people like myself can use technology to make things easier for real human beings is really what we're passionate about and what we're here for. But Linda's points are really, really well taken. Call it a smart city, call it a digital city, call it anything you want. Just do what it takes to be able to use technology. Yeah, to really get out there and really move the needle for the people who live and work in your city.
All right. Well, that is, I think, is a great place to stop. We've got to wrap it up. But Linda Durrell, Ted Ross, thank you both for joining us today. It's been a great conversation, and you've given us a lot to talk about. And of course, we'll be looking out for the Olympic tickets. 5.5 years from now. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next.
Hello, I'm Colin Wood, Editor-in-Chief for StateScoop and EdScoop. I have with me Jason Clark, CIO of Delaware, and Jim Weaver, CIO of North Carolina. Thank you both for joining us.
Ben, glad to be here, sir.
Right. So we're talking about IT consolidation or centralization or optimization. Pick your favorite word. To start, I think it would be helpful if each of you briefly described your IT organizations and your current efforts with regard to IT consolidation. So Jason, you first. What's happening with the Delaware Department of Technology and Information?
Well, you asked to talk about size and you put me up against North Carolina. So I'll start off with something I like to talk about, which is that what we lack in size, we make up for in diversity. So DTI supports all 3 branches of government here in Delaware, including K-12. We have about 21,000 end users in total stateside, and we support 19 districts and 23 charters now, for which we manage circuits, routing, content filtering, email, things like that. We've been consolidating, optimizing, centralizing, and rebranding accordingly over the last 10 years or so. But since our inception, which was over 20 years ago, the Department of Technology and Information has really delivered core services like data center and infrastructure, email, network. And over the last 10 years, we've really expanded those services to include service desks, desktop support, LAN management within the facilities, voice, centralizing on voice. Office 365 kind of took email to the next level, bringing in workforce, and then security as of lately.
Right. And Jim, what's the current state of affairs with the North Carolina Department of Information Technology?
Sure. So the agency was formed back in 2015, created in statute under the previous governor's administration, Governor McCrory at the time. We support just executive branch, so a little bit different than Jason, but we do provide support to approximately, there's 56,000 round number of state employees in the executive branch. Within the agency right now, we are partially consolidated, or the word we use here in North Carolina is optimized. It has been a very slow process. Currently, the agency size is around 1,200 employees. We currently have what you would consider the smaller general government agencies when you think about within a cabinet structure, such as administration, DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, Department of Cultural and Natural Resources, as an example, Department of Military and Veterans Affairs would be part of that general government type situation. We also have Department of Transportation, that's part of us, as well as Department of Public Safety, which by large and far is our largest agency here in the state of North Carolina. What we do not have in the fold yet is Department of Health and Human Services, nor do we have our Department of Commerce. So those are the two probably largest remaining agencies that are currently in existence. Similar to what Jason had described, though, a lot of that traditional compute model, if you will, from data center, infrastructure, networking, email type services are supported here out of the agency as well. And in the biggest challenge we have right now, of course, while I have statutory authority to be able to go ahead and do optimization, we also have some other factors at play, which I'm sure we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Right. Yes. Looking forward to hear about that. So actually, yeah, I'll kick it right back to you. What are some of the political challenges that you face? Is this something that you have to make a case for?
Well, you know, the most interesting component here is where I came in. So Governor Cooper brought me on board here back in March of last year, realizing that we are now entering into his final term as governor here. Right? North Carolina is term limited. And so optimization is not one of those paramount topics to be focused on at the moment. The governor has a very aggressive agenda to get completed here. And to be very clear, he made it my number one priority, made it very clear to me was broadband. So I do have the broadband responsibility here for the state of North Carolina and truly addressing that digital divide. And then secondly was around cybersecurity as well. He wants to continue to elevate our state's cybersecurity posture. And so those two items alone are huge undertakings for us to get completed here. So when I look at more of the traditional compute model, one of the biggest challenges we've had here is the funding, the financials that are behind consolidation or optimization. When the agency was formed, the agency has been traditionally a cost recovery entity. And since I've been here in North Carolina, I'm working very hard to get that corrected. And I do not want to be in the cost recovery business. In fact, we were very successful here in our last legislative session to begin the transition away and not recovering employee costs as part of services provided. That has kind of held us back, if you will, from being able to move forward because we have employees tied to a line of business or a book of business. And what we're trying to do is be more agile as an organization, be able to move forward as technology changes, as the needs of our executive branch agencies change, how we can best move with them and be agile enough to provide the needed services. That allows me now to move my employees to where I need to move them to and not have them tied to a book of business. So what has happened is with optimization that has been done thus far, it's been on a cost recovery basis. So in the military, we use terms AdCon and OpCon. So I have administrative control, but I don't have operational control. In one of these optimized agencies, if there's a vacancy that needs to be filled, I have to go back to that agency and get the financial approval to go ahead and fill that vacancy, even though that vacancy resides technically on my org chart in my organization, but the budget still is back at the originating agency. So we need to continue to move forward. And the next phase of what we're working on now is to change the funding model of how the optimized agencies operate and to kind of get that money or funding to come into our budget so we can begin to truly leverage a shared service experience. Kind of envious a little bit of Jason there in that regard, because I can, you know, I have some very talented people that are siloed, and I see redundancy and duplicity of certain functions being done because of how that funding stream is currently organized. So I want to kind of bring that together a little bit differently to start giving us the flexibility, start getting to that true shared services model and be able to deliver better quality out to our executive branch agencies.
Right. Jason, how do things work in your state?
Yeah, it's funny that this topic is one in which the definition of centralization, optimization, consolidation is really key to the conversation, because some of the things that Jim's describing, we contend with today, that whole people aspect is one of the most difficult to get through. I think defining the services is a key piece to that particular conversation. But we have two major challenges, and one of them is people, the other is chargeback. We're been a fully general funded agency, and it's been difficult to manage agency behavior, to align ourselves from a scalability perspective with the businesses, because things that they consume from us, they do it and they make business decisions that will make that expand greatly, and we don't have any alignment to kind of account for it. So some of those things around, retention, storage, email accounts, when they're all free, you don't manage the inventories quite as well. So there's aspects like that where we're really working from a chargeback perspective. And unless you can successfully broker, the services, it takes people to deliver IT. And so even though we have a lot of really talented people in the workforce, when we go through a consolidation with an agency, many of them have had to wear multiple hats over the years. So it becomes very challenging to get them educated and put into kind of becoming a subject matter expert in a particular discipline for which we deliver services. And when we do create those roles, when we do educate and train, we end up giving them skill sets that put them in pretty high demand in the marketplace. And so one of the things that we're really contending with now as we go through this process, we take on more workload, but our ability to kind of support and deliver on that takes people, and the recruitment intention, I know, is a tough one for everyone right now, but when you factor in state salaries, kind of the antiquated pension plans that take 10 years before you become vested, and most folks that are really engaged aren't looking to wait that long, it becomes a real challenge to kind of educate the next group and continue delivering on these services. So those two key pieces, and little probably, I think we had the same problem, but we're tackling it a little bit differently in the sense of Jim wanting to have it all general fund, and we're looking kind of to move a little bit from that, because we want the ability to take and remove people from the conversation, so that when we deliver on a particular service, I mean, security is a key area, right? You think about how much it has grown, expanded, how much we've needed to increase. And we were given one allocation, a few people, and our ability to add without kind of really showcasing how much support is required or how much demand on particular products is needed. So we're a little different in that respect, but same problem as we move forward.
So let me, if I could just add on that a little bit, Colin, because Jason brought up the funding model. So we basically have three sources of revenue, if you will, here in North Carolina. I have it from cost recovery. I have some positions that are generally funded, and then I have what's called an internal services fund. And for the internal services fund, what we're doing is taking our employees out of the cost recovery of the services being provided. We're moving them into the cost of the internal services fund. That is a fund that is below the line on the budget that allows me to expand that to where I need. We give that number basically as part of our budget submission to the governor's budget office. That goes to the legislature, and the legislature will appropriate the funds back to the agencies that will pay into that fund. So I'm not necessarily getting general funded money directly from the legislature in appropriation. It is still going through the agencies to come back to us. So that way they're able to do their federal matching and other cost allocation opportunities within their respective budgets. I still do have I have about 80, 85 positions that are generally funded. My position as examples out of the internal services fund. I'm not generally funded, believe it or not, as an example. So it's just a little bit different a model, but this way I think it gave us a lot more flexibility. The other thing I think Jason really touched on really is about with our people is the skill sets. Having been worked in another state for a number of years, both as we consolidated within an agency and then let alone consolidated within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and did IT centralization. What you started seeing, and Jason was talking about this, is you had those individuals, especially from a smaller agency, that were jack of all trades and master of none. And as you move into a larger agency that has the opportunity for more specialized skill sets, there was no perfect fit, right? You started like taking the square and putting it into a circle, the circle into a square. And so what we did was we did a very extensive sit down with those employees who did not have a good match and tried to understand what is it that you're interested in doing? Where is it that you want your career to go towards? And we enabled those opportunities to move them in that direction and worked around that, less than perfect fit, if you will, to go ahead and get employees to try to retain them and keep them. Here in North Carolina, we're sitting at a 17% vacancy rate on IT. The state workforce is at 21.7% vacancy rate. So we're struggling, just as Jason said, in recruiting and retaining employees. We've gotten just recently a lot of flexibility to start offering signing bonuses, retention bonuses, some other incentives to try to keep employees or to bring employees in from the outside. But we're at a very challenging area here in Raleigh with the Research Triangle Park, our university system, the number of high-tech firms moving into the area. It is a very talent dry area at the moment because if the talent is being scarfed up as quickly as it can be.
Right. I think a lot of states have they share your pain there for sure. So changing the topic slightly here, in my recent interviews with CIOs on this and related topics, a common theme has emerged. And that theme is that when it comes to any sort of IT modernization project, it's possible to be successful on paper, but to be actually to actually fail in some respect, because you fail to pay attention to certain things that, you may finish the project on time and on budget, but maybe you neglect redesigning business processes or data architecture or any number of other things that could prove important as the years wear on. So that's kind of an open-ended idea that I kind of wanted to throw to you guys and just see what you think about that, whether you agree with that idea and what you've seen in your own organizations on that front. So Jason, could you respond to that first?
Yeah, I think commodity IT and security are pretty relatable items today. They were things that people held close to the vest in the past, but few want the responsibility that comes with keeping the user secure and kind of taking that whole state of approach to commodity IT kind of helps with some of the equity challenges that we saw across our state. So we had agencies supporting all three branches, the haves and the have-nots. And it created a lot of interoperability. I mean, individuals using versions of Excel that they couldn't send a spreadsheet to someone else who could read it, right? Those types of things were occurring. So we were able to infuse some equity when we looked at certain services. It also helped us out with consistency around support and approach. We were in a state that had over 250 different device types deployed throughout the state, differing warranty, components and people buying parts off of eBay to keep things running. And there was a lot of that going on where we were able to stabilize costs through volume purchases and really kind of create some base level costs year over year that take care of the state for those things. As far as there's a lot of lessons learned, I think that we all have lumps we've all taken in the process. Not everything is a fit for centralized services. We were in the beginning, we thought the approach of application delivery, the notion that we got a group of people, we could leverage a pooled set of resources that could work in a particular type of language or a product. But when it came down to it, everyone's operating at a different pace. Everyone's funded at a different pace. There's a lot that goes on that is agenda driven. And even though we're one state in the context in the eyes of our residents and visitors, we really act as a bunch of different companies. And so that's a lot to handle and a lot to deliver on. And so you got to pick and choose those items that make the most sense to centralize. And I think, to Jim's point that he was raising around people is really kind of removing them from the situation in those areas where you can do that, because we ran into time and time again where, hey, I pay for Jim and Jim's over at another agency today, but they didn't recognize that the 4 buildings they have at the other end of the state were being serviced by Joe, who had nothing to do with their books, right? And so that's how we managed through that work volume and take care of it. And we try to give examples all the time, analogies. You know, they pay a cell phone bill. They never think about who's climbing the tower, who's driving the truck, who's answering the phone, any of those things. They just kind of make a payment. They know they get a service. And so that takes time to build that trust and get to that point. And that's kind of been our journey over the last 10 years.
Right. And Jim, what are the kind of hidden things that you have to pay attention to that could prevent your success on a project?
Well, I think going back to your question, I think I would agree that the length of a project tends to also increase risk and the likelihood of a project coming off the rails a little bit. So we've done a couple things here in North Carolina, and again, I don't think there's a foolproof answer here. Every state is unique in its operating model and its authorizing environment. So it's hard to sit there and say, oh, that worked well in this state, and I'm going to adopt that here in North Carolina. But conceptually, the first thing we really have focused around is governance. How do we start from, as a central IT organization, how do we start getting ourselves involved at the time of ideation, at the time when an agency is submitting an IT budget request to do something? And what is that criteria and things that we're going to emphasize to make sure we look at it? How do we assess and evaluate that, rank projects, and then provide a recommendation back to the governor's budget office for consideration? So we've got that process now underway. We're working very diligently to evolve and mature our enterprise architecture platform and discipline and process. That was an area that has been somewhat non-existent. It was kind of one of those things where we all nodded and said we were doing it, but the reality was we weren't doing it. Now we're doing it. And as we're taking a look at it from a business reference model all the way down to a technical reference model and starting to identify where we have those overlapping business capabilities. And as we're starting to insert ourselves or influence the prioritization of IT project requests, we're also able now to sit there and say, hey, are you aware that this capability already exists here, here, and here? And so in essence, we're not trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to use that type of analogy. We want to sit there and focus on what are the unique differences to make your project successful without necessarily going reinventing the wheel again. We're really honing in on project management as well, in the establishment of our enterprise project management office and getting that off the ground. Of course, going back to the conversation of people, good project managers are hard to find. And we're working very diligently to do that. But we have a great cadre right now of project managers that are there doing what they need to do and doing their assessments and then bringing that back. And on a monthly basis, there's a state CIO escalation chart, which projects that they're concerned about as far as maybe coming off the rails or have the potential. We're trying to get ahead of that to try to help the agency that's being impacted to stay on track. And then lastly, it's really about portfolio management. Again, going back to our portfolio services, and again, not doing something that we've already done. Looking at those opportunities that we can reuse and leverage from elsewhere, or looking at what's the decision-making process to bring a new service in. Do we bring that in-house? Do we take a look at that being something that we're going to outsource to the supplier community to provide those critical services? And again, that all wraps around the funding issue as well at the end of the day. But what we're trying to do is work with our governor's budget office and more importantly with our General Assembly here in North Carolina and getting them to realize that we view them as our stakeholders, our shareholders. And when we're coming forward with an effort, what's in it for them, right? Why would you want to invest in us if you want to take it from that type of a concept? So what's the return on investment? What are the outcomes that we're looking to try to achieve? And then again, how do we minimize it? So an agency doesn't necessarily get a large $100 million example, but that's chunked up in manageable chunks where there's certain milestones that have to get hit. When you hit that, you get the next phase of your project money released, and we keep the remainder balance in an IT reserve fund, if you will. So that way an agency doesn't have the opportunity to go through and kind of consume an allocation and not end up with the right outcomes that we're looking for. So we're trying to do a lot of that balancing act. At the end of the day, we're here to make the agency successful, right? So we're not trying to be a hindrance or stop them from moving forward with their very important initiatives. But at the same time, too, we do realize that large-scale IT projects are ripe with failure written all over them, and we're trying to make sure that we do it in a manner that we can get to the best outcome as quickly as possible to benefit all North Carolinians.
I would back Jim up on the portfolio management. The deeper you get into providing services, the more demand that starts to come in. You got to set the right expectations, and you got to really work to be able to manage your staff allocations across the board, so you have that alignment and can deliver kind of on the full stack and stream across that's required for the complexity of these projects that we endure. The other thing that we do here in Delaware, just as kind of an add-in, is the IT directors within the agencies actually are DTI employees. And so that creates a solid line from us, but a dotted line to their leadership. And they sit at the tables with the agency leadership. And Jim touched on it a moment ago, mentioning that, being at the forefront of the conversation can make all the difference and really give us a leg up. Because too often we're kind of, the fire's already happened and you come in, you get called in a little bit late in that process. That creates fiscal challenges, staffing challenges. I mean, the list goes on, and it elongates those projects. So where we're able to kind of get a head start on those, we've had some really great successes where we've been able to place the IT directors within the agencies.
Okay, we're out of time. Jason and Jim, thanks for joining us today. And to our audience, stay tuned for more from the IT Modernization Summit.
Thank you, Colin.
Coming up next.
Jackie Taylor, Alliance Leader for Ernst & Young LLP's U.S. Government and Public Sector Practice, is with us now. Jackie, thanks so much for joining the IT Modernization Summit today.
Thank you for having me. This is going to be great.
It is going to be great. So Jackie, one of the big things on your priority list at EY is citizen experience. And since we're at the IT Modernization Summit, let's talk a little bit more about that. I mean, from your perspective, how do you see that intersection of IT modernization and citizen experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of our IT leadership in the government and public sector recognize that our citizens, each of us and our neighbors, are expecting a parity in experience between what we see in commercial and what we do in commercial, whether it's our Amazon shopping or, online e-commerce, to paying our water bill in government. And I think it's gotten to the point where that expectation has become table stakes these days. And not only from the standpoint of experience for our citizens, just so they are delighted in the way they're interfacing with government, but I think it's also important from the standpoint of how our public officials and their effectiveness is being measured as we look at, the voting public and the campaign year. So it is definitely top of the list from an IT modernization standpoint.
It's funny, you reminded me that I have to pay my water bill. So thanks for that. Leadership, you led off your answer talking about sort of that IT leadership. And, obviously those folks are so critical in making that sort of transition happen to sort of align with what we're seeing in the commercial sector. So how do you see the role of that IT leader in sort of driving that experience?
Yeah, I think that IT leaders today, definitely, it's not an easy task to meet the expectations of a myriad of constituents. But I think there are opportunities for our IT leaders today to look at everything, that the low-hanging fruit, for looking at the portals, right? So there's a lot of information that agencies and governments work to convey to their constituents. So even something as simple as looking at your portal and how you're interfacing with your citizens, and how how easy the navigation is and how intuitive it is, to things like automation. So from an IT perspective, we all know that happy employees, right, definitely translate that to happy interactions with their constituents. So being able to look at, quick and dirty automation capabilities with low code or no code technologies to just get rid of paper and to help make the processes more efficient.
Let's talk a little bit about low code, no code, and automation a little bit. It's something that a lot of CIOs really leaned on during the pandemic. And, I think the role of it in government is certainly here to stay. But I mean, how do you see specifically low code, no code? How do you see that growing and sort of changing in the near future?
Yeah, I think that as our IT leadership community are looking at broader based, more phased changes, like everything from moving from, cloud migration activities, those items that are going to take maybe 1 year, 2 years, or go well into a particular administration, they are at the same time looking to make incremental process. And so there's a heightened appetite for low code, no code solutions, quicker opportunities to take a bite at the apple. And so I see those as like wedge solutions that you do in the beginning to plug the dam. And I think there's a heightened appetite, but these things are happening in parallel, right? They're not mutually exclusive. While they're looking at the quicker automation opportunities to keep people satisfied, to keep their jobs more efficient and kind of accelerated. While they're looking at that, I think our most savvy IT professionals are in parallel looking at the longer term enterprise-based solutions to move the entire government forward.
Yeah, and so let's go back a little bit. You sort of talked about taking small bites of the apple. We talked a little bit just a second ago about sort of that role of the IT leader in driving that experience sort of through IT modernization. But what advice do you have for a CIO or another IT leader to get started on that journey and to really make some of those small bites of the apple, make some of that incremental progress?
Yeah, I'd probably give two suggestions. One is more just fundamental in the approach. The first piece is, the personas today are super multidimensional and multifaceted. So there's no one size fits all. So I would start by looking at who you're trying to serve and whose experience you're trying to improve through the digitization process. So that means that you can have one person who is, looking to get a permit, right, to do work on their home. And that same person could be logging in or accessing the same individuals or system to, as you said, pay your water bill. And so I think that the fact that you can have one individual coming to as an individual resident, but then also coming as a business owner, and then also potentially as an employee, right, or consumer, being able to have a digital approach that's agile enough to address those different personas is going to be really, really important. The other piece of advice that I give to clients all the time is, look within your current technology landscape. I mean, we all know that person who has Microsoft Excel and just uses it for a basic spreadsheet. And then there's the other person who has souped up, interlocked worksheets, et cetera. I think the same thing happens when it comes to technology investment. And so, we have alliance relationships with folks like Microsoft. Most of our clients, will have an Office 365 instance or licenses in their technology landscape. If you just look at your technology landscape, these same providers realize that government is looking to modernize, and they're making differential investments in government-focused solutions. So there's an opportunity for IT leaders to have conversations with their current vendors, express to them their strategy and the direction from a digital perspective that they're looking to go in. And I've seen a significant amount of partnership, accelerated programs, initiated and things of the like, just as a result of opening up that discourse.
It's that collaboration piece, right? It's like treating, people think of collaboration as just intergovernmental, but instead, treating everybody sort of as that stakeholder to pull people together.
Absolutely. It's the information finding stage.
Yeah. So once this work is started, right? Once this real emphasis and transition to a very citizen experience focused mindset is underway, I mean, what's next? What's that next level of citizen experience that we're maybe not talking enough about?
It's interesting because the things that we today are talking about digitizing have just completely matured. So we have an alliance relationship with the King Center. And so things like diversity, equity, inclusion have been digitized. The King Center has a digital platform around nonviolence 365, so 365. So there's a way to actually take a digital approach to your equity and inclusion discussion. If you think about, even things like transportation, They are making some strides in RFID, where they're looking at leveraging, your Easy Pass transponder to allow you to just park in a space and have it recognize and automatically bill you for parking. So it's going from just being able to leverage, bill payments and, chatbots online to truly experiential components that translate into convenience. Jake, I talked to a client the other day, and we were trying to, dissect the difference between the two. And I gave the example, it's the difference between having a citizen miss a few garbage pickups because they're being empathetic to post-COVID, resource constraints, but being empathetic as government and being able to say, okay, we may miss the next 2 pickups, but we're going to advise you of that ahead of time, maybe with an alert or a scatter plot on their phone. You know how convenient that is, experientially, how much better someone feels about government. I mean, I'm sure you've had to pull the garbage in and out a couple of times, and, that's quite the inconvenience, but just having a proactive thought about how to make your citizens' experience better, it goes a really, really long way.
And to go back to your earlier point, right? This is something that we have gotten used to from the private sector, right? It's not just the digital experience, not just the fancy app. It's the overall engagement, right? And I think that that's such an important point. It's that proactive communication. It's making you feel more like a member of a community.
Well, we gave folks a sneak peek that we can do it in government. So even though it has been our experience for years, right, that we were able to do things digitally and commercial, once COVID hit, and all of us were kind of forced in government to do things and be creative, whether it was like COVID communications and vaccination, or how our courts administration and cases were handled. We gave our constituents a taste of what digital could look like if we pushed the envelope. So now that folks have experienced virtual court cases, they're pushing the envelope to say, is that a way that we can manage court cases and interactions going forward? And that's just one example, but absolutely the expectation of government has completely changed.
So let's pull it together, sort of all of that said, right? Let's look a bit forward, right? So if we do all of the things that we're talking about, if we think about the experience, if we think about that overall engagement, if we think about all those things, what does that mean for the future? How can we keep pushing this stuff forward even beyond what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, I think in aggregate, what it means is that we will begin to have a dialogue with constituents as we develop our IT strategies. So it's not something that's going to happen in a conference room or in a vacuum or at a conference, quite frankly, amongst IT professionals in government. It is now an extended conversation with constituents, with business owners, with the P3 discussion where you have public-private partnerships. The conversation, the stakeholders in the conversation have changed. And I think that's for the better. And it'll be for the benefit of the IT leaders that are responsible for executing on these strategies.
Jackie, I'd love your take on this. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Thanks for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Absolutely. It was a good time.
So there's still more to come from today's IT modernization. Stay with us.
Coming up next.
Welcome back to StateScoop and EdScoop's IT Modernization Summit. I'm Benjamin Freed, the managing editor of StateScoop. Upgrading state government technology doesn't come cheap or easy, and more it's on CIOs and other IT leaders to make the pitch to lawmakers who hold the purse strings. Over the past few years, several states have passed budgets and major legislation allowing their tech leaders to do bigger and hopefully better things on modernization, cybersecurity, and ensuring that projects will be supported going forward. To talk about where IT governance meets state house dealmaking, I'm joined now by John Quinn, the CIO for the state of Vermont and head of its Agency of Digital Services, and Brady Vaughn, Budget and Public Affairs Director at the Texas Department of Information Resources. John, Brady, thanks for joining us. Let's dive right into it. You both, part of your jobs is working with your state legislatures who may not be naturally versed in the things that you're doing at your agencies. So how do you approach them, and are they typically receptive to the requests that you make? John, let's start with you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm I'm excited to be here and talk a little bit more about what we've been doing in Vermont, specifically with the legislature and the governor around modernizing IT in general, bringing it up to a level where it's sustainable and we don't have to get into these big CapEx conversations every couple of years. 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago, we created the agency, which is a centralized IT agency of all executive branch IT personnel reporting up through the Agency of Digital Services. That was really our first step in what I'm calling, a transformation of how we deliver services in the state of Vermont. That first year, I spent every single day of the legislative season in the State House, working with lawmakers, introducing myself, letting them know what the agency was about and how it was going to benefit the citizens of Vermont. So my approach throughout the almost 6 years has been to be transparent, be forward thinking, and to continually have conversations with the legislature about what our needs are, where our priorities are, where cybersecurity is in the state, and make sure that all the committees, not just the technology committees, understand where we are.
And Brady, how is it for you in Texas, where you've got lawmakers from all over?
So yeah, I mean, Texas is a unique state, not only in the way in which we legislate. It's just every other year. I think we're one of 4 other states that actually have biennial legislatures. But it's actually nice in Texas because we have a lot of support from a lot of members and leadership here around cybersecurity and technology. They've, over the last couple of years, as it's kind of come to the forefront of everybody's mind with all the different cyber attacks and all, the moving to the cloud and kind of innovating quickly. We've been lucky to have a bunch of different members that will help us out. And one of the things that I think is important when talking to legislative members, especially, when you're talking about members, that this is their part-time job. This isn't something that they do on the regular basis. They all have jobs at home, and not all of them are in IT. Is trying to simplify it for them, trying to make it simple. And as John said, just being transparent with them. That's kind of the key thing. Trying not to, hide the ball, just being out there open. This is what, we're doing. This is what we'd like to do. And just kind of, putting that out there for them to approve.
Yeah. Maybe in reverse, because your lawmakers, this is their part-time job. They all have primary careers. What are the most common questions that you're asked when you're meeting them?
Are we secure? And Mandy Crawford, our executive director and state CIO, has this wonderful line, and it's true and it's terrifying. We have to be right 100% of the time, every time, and the bad actors just have to be right once to get through our system. And so that's kind of what we're doing. We're talking about all the different things that not only we as the IR, but that other state agencies and even the legislative members and their staff can do to be top of mind on best practices for cybersecurity. Because one of the things that we have to do is always be vigilant, and it always starts with the person at the computer, right? That's the first line of defense.
And John, how about you? Do you get some of the questions?
Yeah, I think that's right. Every time we ask for money for cybersecurity, if we give you this money, are we going to be protected? Will this stop all threats? So a lot of it's just explaining and, as I said, being honest about the scope of our challenges and educating them at a oversight level of what needs, what our abilities are, where we stand, and what the threats are out there, so they can understand the risks to the enterprise. One of the other questions I get a lot is, as we've talked about, they're part-time legislators, is how do I provide oversight over cybersecurity? Mm-hmm. Like, how do I know you're doing a good job? How do I know you're doing the right things? So we involve NASIO from time to time, have the executive director, Doug Robinson, come in and talk about the state of the states, what NASIO sees across the United States, to kind of give them some reassurance on what's going on out there and what the threats are, and what other states are doing. So they can at least start to compare where Vermont is compared to other states, whether it be in IT spend, specifically in cybersecurity, or the, some of the mitigation factors that we're taking from software and tools and processes. All those things are helpful when I talk about what other states are doing and how we are approaching those things.
Yeah. So since cyber seems to be a big focus for the lawmakers, I want to turn back to you, Brady, because last year Texas enacted a pretty big new cybersecurity law, set up a lot of new data security standards, a new cloud assessment rubric, and Senate Bill 475. Can you talk about the process of getting that through, and how that went over in Austin?
Yeah, Senate Bill 475 is a unique bill. When we were going into last legislative session, it was right as COVID was still kind of, it was the height of COVID. And we didn't know that whether we'd have access to legislators, how we'd have access to the building, talking to people, because that's a key part of not only my job, but our job here at DIR is to inform, legislative members and staff of what's coming down the pipe. And actually Senate Bill 475 was a combination of about 8 bills that were all put together into one. So if you think about passing one bill, try to do 8 when, multiple statewide programs involved in it, like volunteer incident response team, RSOCs across the state, regional security operations centers across the state, a text ramp program that involves all state agencies, data management officers across all state agencies, that kind of thing. It was unique, and I mean, I'll be honest, it was pretty difficult, but the reason why we were successful was not only because we were, as I think John and I have said, we were transparent about what's happening, we're transparent about the different aspects of the bill, but also having the support of the leadership there, knowing that this is important because of, we all know what happened in COVID. We transitioned to online, we're remote and telework, and everything just changed overnight. And these were really helpful things that they could see on paper that would help their, not only state agencies, but their constituents, the state of Texas as a whole, to be better at cybersecurity, to be better at, response to attacks, things like that.
Mm-hmm. You said part of it was pretty hard. What was there? What in particular was it just the concerns of COVID that made it hard, or were there other big hurdles that you had to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, y'all know this, but talking IT and cybersecurity to anybody who's not in it is difficult, and you have to kind of, I'll just be honest. I'm not an IT expert. I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I'm fairly new to this agency. I feel like I've been here for 2.5 years, or I have been here 2.5 years, but I'm still new to it. There are things that Nancy, our CISO, teaches me every day, and that Amanda, our CIO and executive director, teach me every day. And it's actually kind of funny because the line in Office Space where the guy says he's sitting down in front of the two people interviewing about why he should be at the job, and he's like, I talk to the engineers, and then I talk to the customers. I relay back and forth. That's actually what I think my job is here at the agency. Except I actually.
Yeah. But you're an actual people person.
Yeah, I'm an actual people person. Yeah,
not the guy in Office Space. John, you ever have any experiences like that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, when we talk about technology, people's eyes glaze over, right? And when my position was elevated to a secretary level cabinet appointed position, when we have discussions, it's a lot of times breaking it down, right? Like, stop talking about technology and talk about the business problem at hand and the value of changing the way we do it. And people can understand that. So, relationship building and, a common understanding of the problem, and, finding solutions without getting into, which specific software you're going to use is often, the best approach to keep everyone kind of feeling like they can have a conversation about IT.
Yeah, so let's stay on that in the context of Vermont, because you've been working for the past couple of years, and we've talked about this several times, on a sustainable modernization fund. Talk about that. Getting that into the budget, and what it's going to mean for you going forward.
Yeah, it could be a long story or a short story. So I'll choose this short one for this. Really, it's about maturity of the organization. When we started, we didn't know how many applications we have. We didn't have a good idea what was in our ecosystem. What were the primary tools that we wanted to use going forward. So each year we've refined our processes, maturity model, and we get to a point where it was very obvious that, okay, we know that we want to move from a CapEx model to an OpEx model. How do we get there? Because some of these funding challenges are huge and they're all over the place. We have about 50% of our IT inventory that is considered legacy in our view. So when you look at that, it's like, some of these agencies are pretty small and don't have a lot of resources. How can we help them along? How can we, build a fund that agencies can apply for, or that through our prioritization process can receive funds for implementation purposes to get them off of legacy software and get them onto something sustainable. We started working with the legislature 2 years ago on this and proposed a regenerating revenue source, laid out how we would prioritize projects and the structure of the fund. With all of the different things going on in the legislature, it didn't make it across the finish line unexpectedly. We took it up last year and got the fund established. And as part of that, the legislature put $64 million into the fund to start and identify the projects that the modernization money would start to be used for. This coming year, we'll talk a little bit more about the regeneration of the fund. Okay. What's a sustainable source of revenue that we can use to continue to put money in it that's not just a surplus fund or not.
Yeah, well, let's. I'm glad you brought that up. So let's talk a bit about how you plan for the future. You've got a legislative session that runs from about January through May. The end of May. Yeah. You want to get this fund, keep the fund going, and also I'm sure you have other priorities. What are you, when does your planning for the legislative session start? For the next legislative session start, and what are you gearing up for the 2023 session?
Right. So it's already started, and all conversations at a detailed level are embargoed by the governor's office as we discuss policy initiatives and proposals for the upcoming session. But a note goes out in early July, starting to lay out the timeline of everything from housekeeping bills, technical corrections, to new policy ideas and specific legislation that each agency would like to put forward. So right now, the Agency of Digital Services is in the collecting idea phase. The leadership team has some solid thoughts on what's next, what we need to do to refine our model based on our maturity, and keeping an eye on that modernization fund to ensure that the legislature has faith in what we're doing, and we're able to provide progress reports on the fund and how it's doing. So I think this coming year, you'll see us fine-tuning things more than anything in the legislative season. And we start working with the legislature in September and October, members that their terms haven't run out, or we expect to be on the committee again, starting to have conversations with them, phone calls to kind of update them on what they may see this coming year, what the ideas are, and start to feel out their feelings on the policy ideas that we may be bringing forward.
All right. Well, it looks like we've got Brady back. We got the technical issues sorted out. Brady, we were just discussing, to close out the preparations you're making for your next legislative session. You've got a biennial legislature, so come January, you'll have them they'll be back for their first time in 2 years. What preparations are you making for the 2023 session, and when does that planning start?
So that planning actually generally starts right after the last legislative session. So, and then if you have a couple extra special sessions at the end of it, it always kind of truncates your planning time. But at state agencies, it starts with planning and implementation pretty much on day one after session. So we've been kind of planning for January since then. One of the key things that we're kind of moving forward and planning forward and talking to members about is last legislative session, the legislature put together a modernization fund, a technology improvement and modernization fund, which I think is really, really helpful because as we've talked about, biennial legislative sessions kind of hamstring you a little bit on that 6-month period when they're in session to make changes. And as we all know, IT is not something that you can typically wait 1.5 years to start implementing and changing, and you kind of have to be agile with that. So I think this modernization fund is really helpful because you can start evaluating not just in 2-year windows also, but across interims and across bienniums out 5-6 years and plan out in the future versus looking at 2-year windows when agencies are have this legislative session come up and what they can ask for. That's a key thing for us, and I think that's a key thing for the state, and I think will be really helpful for us moving forward.
All right, great. Well, John, Brady, thank you both for joining us today. I think we've had a great conversation, and look forward to talking to you both more in the future. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Coming up next.
As public tech leaders, we have a more urgent charge than maybe we've ever had. And that is to radically improve or streamline our government service offerings so as to maintain and build trust in government. We make that sound a little less daunting and more palatable to our teams by talking about unleashing the possible in today's digital world. Now, in the World Bank's recent Future of Government report, they warned that while technology will provide the tools to allow for this needed transformation, technology cannot be thought of as the panacea. There is nothing that we can magically unbox, plug in, fix everything with, especially all by ourselves. But it's a little too late. We're now being asked to be the tech leaders, as well as the business process improvers, the engagement specialists, the procurement experts, the project managers, the trainers. So how are we going to get it all done? Well, I'm Lindsay Parker. I'm closing out my 4th year as Chief Technology Officer for DC government, serving in Washington, DC Mayor Muriel Bowser's cabinet. And I'm here to tell you, I don't have the answer yet. But maybe it's helpful to know that no one does. And I'm here to offer a few ideas about ways to organize our teams and our work to better automate government. The CTO role in DC is a bit of a misnomer, really. I'm functionally the CIO for our 100,000 user network in our city populated by 720,000 residents. You do the math, but we've got 40,000 government employees, 60,000 public school students looking at us to provide internet and access. As a city, county, and state, we have 90+ agencies that do what most of you do, from our DMVs, our transportation team, our school system, safety net hospital. So when I say to our vendors and potential partners, if you can make it work in DC, it'll really work anywhere. When I talk to my colleagues, our employees, our stakeholders about streamlining government services, I get a lot of quick thoughts that I'm sure that you've heard from your friends and colleagues as well. From colleagues, I hear, it should be easy. Why can't I just do it for my own agency? Our business processes are just not compatible with that other agencies. Please don't make us work with them. And from our industry partners, we do this for our private sector clients all the time. We've been implementing these types of solutions for 30 years. You don't need in-house expertise. We offer that as a service. And in reality, for the past 30 years, as government tech leaders, we've been putting in place tech solutions to make sure that we're compliant with audits, we're compliant with legislation written by people who aren't focused on user experience. But that means each of those 90 agencies now have their own systems, their own platforms, heck, even their own data fields. And we expect residents to figure out where to find the service they need, whether that's in person, on the phone, or on one of 10,000 web pages with the same number of web applications. Those online applications have exponentially increased during COVID. Now our employees and our residents have even more alphabet soup to weed through to do their jobs or ask for a service. But we did see some things during COVID that helped us. We partnered with our Department of Health and were able to co-create valuable solutions that led to transformative outcomes. Really, a continuously improving vaccination pre-registration and scheduling system that we just turned back on for monkeypox. A call center that walked residents through the same process that others were seeing online, but on the phone and in multiple languages, if online wasn't practical for them to get to. And then we transitioned that experience to COVID centers, where we streamlined the experience we first had to gatekeep online into an in-person experience that's quick and painless. So as a resident of DC or an employee of DC government, you can walk into a COVID center in each of our 8 wards, grab a rapid test, get a PCR test, snag a vaccine, catch up on your boosters, not to mention get a mask. But the first week that we had 6,000 COVID vaccinations here in Washington, DC, we saw 7 million clicks at the same time on our scheduling application. And even though the 6,000 vaccination appointments ran out in less than 20 minutes, meaning the system worked, the user error messages, the sluggishness of the system, the frustration of not getting an appointment, that made national news. If you were a DC resident and already vaccine resistant, you weren't coming back to that darn site to get another appointment. I'll wait, you thought. And that trust in government eroded ever so slightly. We got back on track really fast and added a pre-registration system within the week. So we would only invite a certain number of people to select an appointment. And we ended up seeing almost 140,000 people get shots in arms before the vaccine became so widely available that people could walk in for a vaccine without an appointment. There wasn't even an online article, though, about that. So I tell anyone who will listen, the public sector, especially local government, tech solutions have to be more reliable, more secure, more accessible than those private sector solutions that sometimes were sold. Thinking it will probably fit our needs because it worked for a private sector enterprise or a consumer product. But please know, we have to guarantee that our systems won't go down. Think about 911. Won't get hacked, can be accessed in all languages. Side note, when you tell me that Amharic isn't available on your platform, you're telling me that if I select your product, then I have to break the law. We have to guarantee that our systems are going to work even if the user doesn't have an email, even if that user doesn't have a credit card, and with whatever browser and operating system combination that user can afford. Those are the roadblocks that are up against a tech solution that we have to make sure we get rid of. And so moving forward, we're working to bring about simple, secure, and accessible solutions so we can help build and maintain trust in government, which is more important today than maybe ever before. And so here are just a few ways that we've been thinking about it within our organization. One, we thought about the people getting the work done. With Mayor Bowser's help, we restructured our teams and we found funding to do just that. So that if we're building a new solution for you or an agency, you can work with a collaborative partner now that understands our enterprise platforms, our enterprise data, and our enterprise capabilities all on one team. And that's our digital services team. Two, we snagged a consultant to bring us lessons learned, right? We brought in someone to help us learn how to think differently, bust up our old ways of working so we can provide innovative solutions, leveraging a diverse set of problem-solving skills. Essentially, we made ourselves a little toolkit, a roadmap to think through these new ways of working. Third, we're sharpening our collaboration skills. We brought together agencies to ensure that they're working together to solve common problems and provide cohesive experiences, right? The no wrong door approach. If somebody goes and asks for help at our transportation office, but it turns out it's a ticketing issue and our DMV is the one that takes care of it, we can't blame the user for not knowing that. We've got to make sure that that process is seamless. Fourth, we came up with our first product, a new business portal, right? Really thinking about how we were going to get our economy back on track. We knew that we needed to make things easier for our small businesses to do business with government. We're learning lessons really on how to create a single point of entry for divergent processes and different service domains, right? Those 90 plus agencies, how do we make sure that they're getting the information they need to provide the service, but we're doing it in a way that our customer, our resident expects. And fifth, we need to increase access to the internet, right? If we're doing all this work to improve our online services, we really want to make sure that everyone has the ability to get online. And so we're working to find creative ways to increase competition, both through the Build Back Better bipartisan infrastructure law and through some of the work that we were already doing here ourselves to really bring faster and lower cost broadband, if not free, right, through President Biden's ACP program to every resident in our city, allowing each resident equal online access to the district government, still pushing though, to make sure your experience on the phone and in person is really akin to that streamlined online service. And sixth, something else that's helping our tech team move forward faster, and we're seeing the same kind of thinking in more and more places. A year ago, my boss, DC Mayor Muriel Bowser, let me step up to serve as the Assistant City Administrator, essentially the COO, with responsibility for our internal services. That's human resources, procurement, facilities, technology. I'm really leveraging that role to ensure our services inside government match the transformation we're pushing for our residents. I want to make sure that we're a place that unicorns will flock to, that innovation, improvement, and efficiencies are the first thought when we're designing the future of how we work. We're no longer going to be an organization that defines done as a solution is in place. Right? Instead, we're going to push for constant and consistent improvement. The end result will be a government that operates effectively for our residents, our businesses, our employees, our visitors, and our families. So if you're looking for a new place to work, or you've got friends or colleagues or mentees thinking about where to go next, I can't say enough about working for a local government right now, especially a place like DC government. There's no other place where an idea on Monday can be designed, developed, and launched by Friday, and immediately begin to positively impact people's lives by that Friday. We saw it over and over again during the pandemic, and we're looking for ways to harness that energy, rethink government services that are fit for the future. So come join us and remember to thank a public servant today. Thanks so much, good luck. We're all in this together. Let's learn from each other.
Coming up next.
Joining me now are Melissa Wu, Executive Vice President for Administration and Chief Information Officer at Michigan State University, and Scott Midkiff, Vice President for IT and CIO for Virginia Tech. Melissa, Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to be here.
So let's dive right in here. I mean, the higher education environment presents a few really unique challenges when it comes to IT modernization. So Scott, I want to go to you first. When you hear about IT modernization in other sectors, what really stands out to you about making it happen in higher ed, and how are you doing that at Virginia Tech?
Sure, I think there are really sort of three key features for higher ed that are a little bit different than some other environments in government and corporate. One of those is that decision making at universities, especially large research universities like Virginia Tech, like Michigan State, it's very distributed, right? And so there's a lot of autonomy out in different colleges and departments and research institutes. Top-down mandates typically don't play out very well. And so there's a lot more emphasis that's needed on consensus, right? Building consensus, building sort of shared vision of where modernization needs to go. People, different organizations are coming from very different places. Some are focused on how do we minimize risk. Others are very focused maybe on student experience and how do we make sure we have the best possible student experience. Others are trying to minimize cost or make sure that administrative staff have everything they need. All those are of course important, and it's a matter of finding the right balance. A second difference is that we really have a lot of different colors of money, if you will, at universities. And so as we look at, for example, a move from on-premises administrative systems to running things in public cloud, software as a service, we really need to tap into some different kinds of funds. In Virginia, for example, we have something called the Equipment Trust Fund, which helps us buy hardware, but cloud services are not eligible for those funds. And so we have to find ways of shifting our budgets in that way. And kind of related to the above, a third point is that we're kind of complex, for our revenue or budget. This sort of very distributed nature. We have, we're not making a single product, a single widget, right? We have very active sort of teaching and learning programs, also very active research programs, outreach programs, especially at a land grant university like Virginia Tech or Michigan State. And so we end up having lots of different business models that all have to come together. We have lots of different stakeholders, a whole array of compliance and regulatory things that we have to meet. And so that complexity, I think, comes into how we do modernization as well.
Yeah, and Melissa, I want to hear your perspective here as well. You've been CIO at a number of universities, and really from your perspective, what is unique about the higher ed IT environment when it comes to that modernization approach?
Well, I appreciate everything that Scott just talked about because all of them apply, as he pointed out, to Michigan State as well. The one that really strikes me, and I'm actually known for saying higher ed really isn't that different, except for an area that we're really working on right now, and that's identity and access management. And my elevator speech around IAM is that it's getting the right people access to the right things at the right time in the right way. And the reason that higher ed is actually a special snowflake in IAM is ask yourself, in how many other industries do they allow people to retain access to services after they've separated from the organization? Higher ed. Another area would be, in how many industries can one person hold multiple roles that have different access to data? So for example, we can have staff who are also students. We can have students that are also staff. And as you can imagine, each of those roles has different access to data. And that's something I think that keeps us all up at night as well.
So one of the biggest things that I'm hearing from higher ed IT leaders since the pandemic started and sort of as the phase of it that we're in now is that this concept of an app or a digital service is sort of not enough, right? This was the conversation sort of pre-pandemic, was that we can use a lot of front-facing digital technologies to improve experience for students, but I think that university administration and IT leaders themselves are sort of realizing the importance of that role that a back office IT would play here. So, I want to dive in a little bit. Melissa, what are some of the back office, more IT focused modernization or transformation projects that you have underway to improve the experience of the you mentioned it, the various stakeholders that you serve?
Well, I did just mention identity and access management. It's something that we're completely trying to revamp and reestablish, but really our major focus right now in terms of a strategic initiative really isn't specifically a technology initiative. It's to change from the old school technology first attitude that central IT has had, and many central IT organizations had in the past, the one that's really around experience first. And IAM is part of that, of course, but there are other parts of experience. In other words, how people feel before, during, and after they experience our services and our products and interact with us. These things are so incredibly important for everyone in our university community.
And Scott, what about you? I mean, what are some of your big modernization or transformation projects that are sort of coming from your side of the house in the IT office?
So I think some of these are driven actually by experience during the pandemic, and not that they're like just because of the pandemic. They were around before. They were certainly accelerated. And while a lot of things really worked very well in IT as we went into the pandemic and as we sort of continued through it, and as we're kind of finding the new normal, it was very clear that sort of some paper-based processes and some other processes that were outdated like completely failed, right, as employees went to work from home. And so I think a lot of people sort of woke up and decided, hey, we need to provide a better experience for our administrative staff and folks that have to make the finances, HR, other functions of the university work. And so we certainly have a lot of effort that's, was happening before the pandemic, but really sped up as we look at how do we modernize our administrative systems. And this is a big challenge because we have a legacy with lots of customizations, lots of integrations. And so we're really on a, very early on a path to kind of figure out, how we move forward with reducing those customizations and still achieving the functionality that people really need. And how do we reduce our footprint in the data center? How do we increase our resilience through that? And then, security models, cybersecurity is just always a threat. It's always there. But a lot of sort of some of the assumptions about our visibility into devices, our visibility into network traffic have really been challenged by work from home and distance learning. And so we are trying to really look at how do we make sure we have the right kind of endpoint protection for all employees, including those working from home.
Melissa, you have a really interesting project going on, a partnership between the IT office, the facilities department, and the campus police. Can you tell us a little bit about that and some of the work you're doing there?
Well, what's really interesting is that each of us has some need for 24/7 monitoring that can't be fully automated. So in other words, there needs to actually be real human brains working on it. And so when I spoke to facilities, and as you know, facilities has become more and more tech driven. There's sensors everywhere for heating, HVAC, and sensors for entry and whatnot. I was speaking to the head of facilities, and he said, "Oh, I want to stand up a data center to monitor blah blah, these sensors." And I said, "Really? Wait a second. We don't have 24/7 monitoring in IT." And I also happened to talk to the police chief, and he said, we really need to have good 24/7 monitoring of our security cameras and other things that we need for public safety. And I said, all right, in the context of stewardship and sustainability, which is part of the university's strategic plan, we all have 24/7 needs. We really should not be standing up separate 24/7 shops, and not just physically, but also in terms of personnel. So the three areas are working together with a consultant to come up with a proposal to create one 24/7 operations center, which in the future might also include not just service desk, which is what we're thinking about here, but we also don't have a security operations center that's 24/7. And that meshes really well with the police force because there's a lot of connections between some of our police officers who are interested in cybersecurity, as well as the people that are in cybersecurity that might be considering law enforcement. So there's some great connections there, not just in terms of saving money, but also in terms of professional development.
That's really cool. It's going to be exciting to see how that plays out and just see what that means for Michigan State longer term. Scott, I want to go back to a point you were just talking about, sort of right at the end there. You were talking about some of the cyber modernization efforts that you had underway. Can you tell us about those and maybe how they're fitting into some of these wider modernization goals that we're talking about?
Right. So this ties a little bit back to what Melissa was just talking about. So we see a need for sort of more 24/7 observation, security operations center. And so that's kind of one of our thrusts, because the university really is a 24/7 operation. And we're moving toward a managed security operations center for that function. As I mentioned earlier, with increase in work from home, but really with a lot more sort of data compliance and other kind of regulations out there, we need to step up our game, if you will, for endpoint protection. So we have an improved endpoint protection project underway to really look at how do we deploy endpoint detect and respond, EDR, and data loss prevention, DLP, enterprise-wide, and to make sure that we have the right capacity and the right processes for responding to the results from that kind of monitoring. And then we have operated, with a certain level of security controls. We follow a Center for Internet Security controls model. We've used implementation group 1. Might mean something to some people, but we're moving to implementation group 2. And really sort of the bottom line of what that means is that we are upping our controls and standards and expectations for devices, endpoint devices, and servers across the university, right? So back to my comments on being sort of a distributed organization. Some of these systems are not under the control of division of IT, but yet those same kind of standards need to apply. So we need to have the standards and controls, but also we need to help people be compliant with those standards and control. So that's kind of a third major effort in the security area that we're undertaking.
So let's sort of pull it all together now, right? We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about security. We've talked about some of the big modernization and transformation projects that you all have underway. Obviously, all of these efforts are going somewhere, right? How do you see the modernization work that you're thinking about now, talking about now? How do you see that work leading into the future? And what does that look like? We'll go to you first, Melissa.
Well, in this world of hyper-personalization of digital assets, I really think that focusing on experience first really will help modernize our IT organization, because students can go to any university. So they have the qualifications to do so. So we want to make sure we provide a great experience to our students, and also they're here to learn. And also for our faculty and staff, honestly, we need to retain them as well. And so we need to make sure that their experience here is top notch. And that's why that's so important to me. And I think it really will help us modernize going forward. Also, something else that we're working on that's consistent with our strategic plan is equity and access, because that's also part of providing a good modern environment for our students, faculty, staff, and actually the greater state of Michigan.
And Scott, you can close us out here. I mean, when you think about all these modernization efforts that we're talking about, where is it all headed? What does the future look like for you at Virginia Tech?
So I think, if we want to look sort of aspirations for the future, I think one is to really have our services and from information technology well aligned with sort of business needs and well aligned with student needs. So it goes back to, experience, the student experience and employee experience that Melissa was talking about. I think also as we look at workforce challenges, that we have to find ways to make sure that we're really leveraging our workforce for the kinds of things they need to be working on, and not just kind of routine work that could be done in other ways. So automation is very important, less customization, better leveraging of SaaS and cloud services are going to be very important to the future. And finally, cyber threats never end. We have to find ways to kind of keep our head above water, if you will, in that area. But as we do so, make sure that we're doing that in a way that's cost effective, that we're good stewards of funds, and also in ways that let our students and our employees actually get work done, right? And not just sort of lock them down to a point where they're not productive. And we have to maintain, the open environment of a research university for exchange and having kind of lots of people connect, both physically and virtually. So I think addressing cyber threats, automation, and then aligning with business needs and providing great experiences.
That's great. Well, Scott, Melissa, we could talk about this all day, but what a pleasure to have you join us today. Thanks for being here. We look forward to hearing more from you soon.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, enjoyed it, Jake. Thank you.
And more to come from today's IT Modernization Summit.
Coming up next.
Thank you for the opportunity from State Scoop to speak and to close this event. State Scoop has been such an important source of information for so many in the state. Happy to have the chance to participate today. We are not in person, but I know I would recognize many familiar faces. It is wonderful to be in my IT comfort zone, but spreading my wings, I was appointed the GovOps Secretary in March. In this role, I oversee about a dozen offices, boards, and departments, including control agencies, big departments that support all of state government. And I am continuing a short term as the Director of the Office of Data and Innovation. More on those roles in a minute. As you know, we are all making our way out of COVID pandemic, one of the most intense period of my career. As many of you know, I was the state CIO during COVID, meaning I led a department that had responsibility for literally hundreds of technology tools across the state government. Like some of you, I worked nearly every day of the week for the first year of the pandemic. And we worked late into the evenings in 2020, helped building, fixed, procure technology tools government leaders needed to understand and respond to the pandemic. One of the more intense time was when we learned the hospitals and clinics potentially be overcome by COVID patients. The state leaders needed to know urgently the capacity of the California hospitals and clinics. And that's where we pull all of the data real time and display in the way that all of the leaders could use that information in an understandable manner. The extreme urgency of building that tool and the life and death stakes associated with it was daunting. But it focused the mind and drove us to work harder and smarter, and I believe we all rose to the occasion. We supported the immediate, urgent transition of approximately 200,000 state workers to telework, a massive undertaking that involved hard work by every department in the state so that we could sustain state operations. We also supported the urgent need to get technology tools to school children who did not have access to hardware or high-speed internet that it needed for virtual learning. Continues today, a broadband for all initiative in California with a historic investment by the administration and the legislature, and $6 billion that California is going to have its very own open access middle network to support the last mile connection by 2026. In COVID-19, we also developed a COVID-19 website. That of itself is something extraordinary. We had to do this on a near real time and present information available to all Californians almost as soon as major decisions were made and the guidance were made. This needs to be posted, including the lockdown orders, the closures, the PPE, mask guidance, you name it. Unlike other state websites that have come before, the COVID-19.ca.gov website information changed almost daily based on the inquiries we were getting from Californians. In early that part of the pandemic, it got more than 100 million views, which was extraordinary. I'm not aware that we have ever taken that approach in the website design in California, and I am proud of the information we were able to make available there for the people of the state. COVID truly did change how we thought about risk and the speed we could move when we had to get projects done. Does that mean I want us to sustain that intensity? No. All of us need time to rest and reflect before charting our new course. We are thinking a lot about how California should move forward, both in terms of technology and in terms of policy and operations. Some of my observations. During the pandemic, the need to collect, understand, and interpret data was critical to state leaders. That need for good data displayed well continues today in state government. It informs our understanding of who is and isn't getting the basic service that they need, what government process can be streamlined, and what outdated steps that are no longer necessary in the digital age. Technology tools, GIS, dashboard, website, survey, notification app, virtual vaccine record, all were important technology tools used in different ways for different reasons to support state operation and a clear understanding of what was happening in the state, and especially what the people that needed most from us. Technologies wove into every facet of state government, and we need to continue integrating the power of technology into state operation. But technology is not the magic bullet. Innovation, it's about people. We need to have people embrace risk and change the state policy and operations to grow and take risk, try new things in new ways. We need to design solutions that are tested with real Californians from all walks of life so that we know they work before we deploy them. As secretary, I'm focused especially on 3 initiatives. Building the state workforce, we need to hire and retain a new generation of employees in this new hybrid work setting, while continue to build a skilled, diverse state government workforce. Sustaining transformation to hybrid workforce, supporting timely implementation of more expensive and resilient state operations continuously measured by key results, and creating a culture of innovation, move from being a risk-averse culture to one that embraces innovation and change to serve state operation goals. That means leading and supporting the work we do as people to innovate in government, applying technology tools to help us do our work in new ways. Leading government at this level requires managing relationships, inspiring innovative thinking, and helping people modernize programs and operations. More than 140 years ago, in a laboratory in New Jersey, Thomas Edison introduced his first perfected electric light bulb, helping move the country from candles and oil lamps to the wonder and convenience of electric lighting. The light bulb became a household item because of Edison, along with Louis Latimer, who helped improve the filament so it burned for an extended period of time and were able to perfect it. And this collaboration changed the way Americans lived forever. I know what you're thinking. What could that possible have to do with the state government in the era of artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and the metaverse? It has to do with Edison's frame of mind. In his laboratory, there was a sign that read, "There is a way to do it better, find it." As we all continue working together to improve state government, I hope you will think boldly and find the ways to do it better. Thank you for your dedication, for your work, and your commitment to learning. I look forward to partnering with you and continuing to improve how we do our work for the people of California.